Welcome, welcome. You're here at Harry vs. X. Today we present to you, what if Thor brought Harry to Asgard at age 4 and Odin raised him as god of magic, making wizards fear Norse power? Like and subscribe if you want more awesome stories. Sit back, relax, and enjoy. Chapter 1, The Boy in the Ruins. The night Godric's hollow burned, Thor was hunting a storm. Not a metaphorical storm, an actual one. A rogue atmospheric tear that had opened somewhere over the North Atlantic and started pulling lightning from 3 different cloud systems simultaneously. Normally that would have been exactly the kind of thing Thor found relaxing. A good storm, some thunder, maybe a kraken if he was lucky. But this one had the wrong smell to it. Like iron and old pennies and something underneath that he couldn't name, a vibration that made Mjolnir hum against his palm without him asking her to. He'd been tracking it for 20 minutes, riding the wind southeast over the English countryside, when it happened. The pulse. It wasn't an explosion. He'd felt explosions, he'd caused most of them. This was different. This was something tearing, the way fabric tears when you pull at a weak seam, and the sound it made wasn't sound at all but rather the sudden, violent absence of sound, a silence so complete that the storm around him stuttered and died mid-lightning bolt. Every hair on his arm stood up. Mjolnir didn't just hum. She screamed. Thor dropped altitude fast, following the feeling the way a shark follows blood, instinct overriding everything else, and within 90 seconds he was descending through smoke over a small village. Thatched roofs. Stone walls. A church spire cutting the dark. And in the middle of a residential street, one house that was no longer exactly a house. He landed in the garden. Or what had been the garden. Now it was rubble and scorched earth and a smell like burnt copper that got into the back of his throat and stayed there. The house hadn't been blown apart, it had been hollowed. Like something had reached in through the front door and simply removed everything that mattered, leaving the outer walls standing as a monument to whatever had happened inside. Thor stepped over the ruined gate and moved carefully through the debris, Mjolnir in hand, his senses pushed out in every direction. The magic here was extraordinary. He'd felt Asgardian sorcery his entire life, had watched Loki fold reality in half with a bored expression, had stood in the vault where the Tesseract breathed its cold blue light. This was none of those things. This was older. More fundamental. It moved through the air like water moves through water, it was just part of everything, saturating the stones and the smoke and the broken plaster like it had always been there and was only now visible because someone had torn the house open to let it out. He found the woman first. She was just inside what had been the front door, and Thor crouched beside her for a moment in silence. He'd seen death before. He'd caused death before. It never stopped being a thing that required a moment. She had red hair and she'd been beautiful, and whoever had killed her had done it fast at least, which was the only mercy he could find in any of this. He moved deeper into the ruin, stepping over broken beams, following that pulse of magic which was still going, still happening somewhere above him, a heartbeat of raw power that, he looked up through the hole in the ceiling. The child was sitting on the floor of the upstairs room, which was now essentially a floor with stars for a ceiling, the roof entirely gone. He was very small. 4 years old, maybe. Dark hair in every direction, small hands folded in his lap like he was waiting for someone to come and read him a story. He was surrounded, and this was the thing that stopped Thor's breath in his chest, by runes. Not carved. Not painted. Just burning in the air around the boy at about knee height, slowly rotating, casting pale white gold light across the ruined floorboards. They were Futhark. Not modern Futhark. Not the simplified version that Asgardian scholars argued about in libraries. Ancient Futhark. The kind that predated written language itself, the kind that Odin had brought back from Yggdrasil with a spear through his side and knowledge in his eyes that hadn't been there before. This 4-year-old child was sitting in the middle of Odinic runes that had assembled themselves out of pure ambient magic. Thor did not consider himself a scholarly man. He didn't pretend to understand the deep mechanics of sorcery the way Loki did or the way his mother had. But he knew what he was looking at, the same way anyone raised in Asgard would know. This was sear. Raw, untrained, bleeding out of this child like light bleeds out of a cracked lamp. He climbed up through the hole in the floor carefully, moving slowly, not wanting to startle the boy, and crouched at the edge of the rune circle. The child looked up at him. His eyes were green. Brilliantly, impossibly green, the color of the northern lights on a clear Asgardian night. And behind them was something that Thor recognized immediately, not intelligence exactly, because all children were intelligent in their way, but awareness. A depth of presence that had no business being behind the eyes of someone so small. There was a cut on his forehead. Lightning-shaped, freshly sealed, crusted at the edges but not bleeding anymore. Whatever had caused it, the wound had already begun to heal in a way that skin didn't normally heal. "Hello," the child said. Thor blinked. He'd been prepared for screaming. He'd been prepared for catatonia or hysterics or any of the dozen ways that small humans responded to catastrophic trauma. He had not been prepared for a simple greeting delivered in a calm, curious voice. "Hello," Thor said. "You're big," the child observed. "I am," Thor agreed. The child looked at Mjolnir, then back at Thor's face, apparently making some kind of assessment. "Are you here to help?" Something about that question, the straightforward practicality of it, no accusation, no fear, just a child asking a reasonable question about a stranger's intentions, hit Thor somewhere behind his sternum. "Yes," he said. "I am here to help." The boy nodded, like that settled it. "My mum and dad are gone," he said. He said it the way children say difficult things, directly, without emotional architecture around it, because they don't yet know that difficult things require softening. Just the fact, delivered plainly, with enormous weight. I felt them go. The runes around him pulsed once, warm and gold. "I'm sorry," Thor said, and meant it in the way he'd learned to mean it, not as a social formula but as a genuine acknowledgement of loss. "What is your name?" "Harry," the boy said. "Harry Potter." Thor looked at the runes. Looked at the boy. Looked at the cut on his forehead and the magic saturating every surface of this room and the fact that whatever had killed this child's parents had apparently tried to kill the child too, had clearly thrown something at him that would have destroyed most things in the universe, and had instead bounced off a 4-year-old and left a scar. He thought about what lived on Asgard. What resources existed there. What his mother had been, what his brother was, what the libraries of the realm eternal contained. He thought about leaving this child here and what would happen to him, small and magical and extraordinary and completely alone in a world that clearly had no idea what it had made. "Harry Potter," Thor said. "Would you like to come with me?" Harry looked at him for a long moment. The runes slowed their rotation, hovering. "Where?" he asked. "Somewhere safe," Thor said. "Somewhere with good food, and people who understand magic, and a great many things worth seeing." Harry considered this with the seriousness it deserved. Then he stood up, small and skinny and wild-haired in his striped pajamas, and walked forward through the runes, which parted around him without disturbing a single ember on the floor. He stopped in front of Thor and held out his arms, the universal childhood gesture for pick-me-up, utterly unconcerned with the fact that he'd just walked through ancient sorcery like it was a beaded curtain. Thor picked him up. Harry grabbed a fistful of his cape immediately and held on, and within 3 minutes they were airborne, rising through the smoke into the cold English night, and Godric's hollow shrank to a pinprick of orange light below them. "It's cold," Harry said, face pressed into Thor's shoulder. Thor wrapped his cape around him. "Better?" "Yes." A pause. "What's your name?" "Thor." "Like the god?" "Exactly like the god." Harry seemed to find this reasonable. He was asleep before they cleared the cloud cover. Odin Allfather, king of Asgard, ruler of the 9 realms, had seen a great many things in his long life. He had seen the birth of stars and the death of civilizations. He had drunk from Mimir's well and paid the price for wisdom. He had faced the frost giants, imprisoned Surtur, watched his children grow into legends and catastrophes by turns. He thought he was beyond surprise. He was not, it turned out, beyond surprise. When Thor walked into the throne room at 3 in the morning carrying a sleeping 4-year-old wrapped in a red cape, Odin said nothing for a very long moment. He regarded the child. He regarded his son. He looked at the Allfather's single eye back to the child. The child, who had woken at some point during the Bifrost landing and was now peering back at Odin from the shelter of Thor's shoulder with those impossible green eyes, wide and alert and utterly unafraid. Frigga, who had appeared at Odin's side with the silent swiftness of someone who had been expecting this moment, which was a concerning thought, stepped forward and held out her hands. Harry looked at her, then at Thor, who nodded. Then Harry leaned out of Thor's arms toward Frigga with the absolute trust that only children possess, the trust that has no logic behind it, only instinct. Frigga took him and held him close, and something in her face, Thor watched it happen, something in his mother's face unlocked. "Odin," she said softly. "Yes," Odin said. He'd moved from his throne and was standing close, studying the boy with an expression Thor hadn't seen on his father's face in a long time. Not wariness. Not calculation. Something more like recognition. "I see it. The runes," Thor said. "When I found him, father, he was surrounded by, I know what he was surrounded by," Odin said. Not sharply. Just, precisely. "You knew about him?" Thor asked. Odin looked at him. "Bring the boy to the healing room. Have Air examine that wound. Then tomorrow, we will speak." "Father, tomorrow, Thor." Thor wanted to argue. He was Thor, arguing was essentially his primary mode of communication. But something in his father's face stopped him, the something that was recognition and weight and an old man carrying something heavy. He swallowed it. Harry, from Frigga's arms, looked at Odin. "Your eye patch is funny," he said. A silence fell over the throne room. Odin blinked. Just once. Then, very quietly, he said, "Is it?" "It's like a pirate," Harry said. "Are you a pirate?" "I am," Odin said gravely, "decidedly not a pirate." "Oh," Harry said, mildly disappointed. Then he yawned enormously and tucked his face into Frigga's neck, apparently satisfied with the exchange. Thor looked at his father. His father looked at him. For one astonishing moment, something tugged at the corner of Odin's mouth. Then it was gone, and the All-Father was striding out of the throne room, and Thor stood alone in the golden hall wondering what, exactly, he'd brought home. Air declared Harry physically healthy apart from the scar, which she studied for a very long time with her hands glowing soft amber before announcing that whatever magic had created it had also permanently altered the cellular structure of the skin. It would never fade. She also noted, with a scientist's careful neutrality, that the boy's magical core was unlike anything she had documented in 40 years of Asgardian medicine, not merely powerful, but structured differently, as if two entirely separate magical traditions had been woven together in the same source. "Like two rivers joining," Frigga said. "Like two rivers that were always the same river," Air corrected. Harry, who had been subjected to all of this examination with patient good humor, was now sitting on the examination table eating a piece of bread that someone had produced, studying Air's medical tools with frank curiosity. "What's that one do?" he asked, pointing at a crystal rod. "It measures the temperature of the soul," Air said. Harry thought about that. "What temperature is mine?" Air looked at him. "Hot," she said, and said it with enough weight that Frigga looked at her. Frigga took Harry to the smallest guest chamber after that, a room that was, by Midgardian standards, roughly the size of a modest ballroom, with walls of pale gold stone and windows that looked out over the city of Asgard spreading down to the sea. Harry stood at the window in his pajamas and looked out at all of it, the lights and the spires and the distant rainbow arch of the Bifrost still faintly glowing from Thor's arrival, and his face was very still and very serious. "This is where you live?" he asked. "Yes," Frigga said. "It's very shiny." "It is rather," Frigga agreed. Harry pressed his small nose against the glass. "My mum's gone," he said, not looking away from the city. Yes, sweetheart. And my dad? Yes. He was quiet for a moment. Will I have to go back? Frigga crouched beside him so their eyes were level. She studied his face, the wild hair, the overlarge pajamas, the lightning scar still pink and new against his forehead, and made a decision that was both entirely instinctive and entirely deliberate. No, she said. If you don't want to. Harry looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded once, decisive, and turned back to the window. Okay, he said. And that was that. Odin made his decision on the third day. He called Thor to his study, not the throne room, the study, which was where Odin went when he wanted to think rather than rule, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, and a single desk and a fire that burned blue at night, and told him to sit down. Thor sat. He had spent 3 days watching his father with Harry, watching those meetings that were somehow always happening by apparent accident, Harry wandering into the library and finding Odin there, Harry at breakfast asking another completely unfiltered question about the eye patch or the ravens or the suspiciously not decorative spear. And watching Odin answer every single time, brief and patient and with a quality of attention that Thor recognized uneasily because Odin had looked at him that way maybe a dozen times in his entire childhood. He will stay, Odin said. I'd hoped, Thor said carefully. He will be raised as a Prince of Asgard. Odin paused. Not in place of his heritage. He knows who he is. He knows where he came from. That will not be erased. He's 4. He barely knows where anything is. He will grow, Odin said simply. And as he grows, he will learn both. Asgardian sorcery. Midgardian heritage. The two magics that are already living in him side by side. He looked at the fire. He is something that has not existed before, Thor. A child born of 2 magical traditions simultaneously. What lives in him is older than Hogwarts and older than the first Asgardian seerworkers. It is a bridge. Between worlds. Thor was quiet for a moment. You knew about him before I found him. It wasn't a question. Odin didn't treat it as one. I knew there would be a child like him, Odin said. I did not know when. I did not know where. The Well of Mimir does not give timetables, only shapes of things to come. He paused. I knew he would need Asgard. I did not think Asgard would come to find him. I followed the magic, Thor said. It called Mjolnir. It called her like kin. Odin said nothing, but something in his expression confirmed everything. What is he? Thor asked quietly. Odin looked at him for a long moment. He is our son, he said. If we choose to make him so. Thor thought about the child asleep in the guest chamber 3 floors up with Frigga's enchanted star projector making constellations on the ceiling because Harry had asked what stars were and cried a little when told they were very far away. He thought about small hands wrapped around Thor's thumb at breakfast, curious about everything, afraid of nothing. Yes, Thor said. We choose. The years on Asgard were not a montage. They were a life. Harry grew in the way that things grow when they're given extraordinary nourishment, not just fast but deeply, putting down roots in every direction simultaneously. He learned swords from the warriors 3, who found him delightful in the way large men find small determined children delightful, like watching a very earnest puppy. He learned to ride from the stable masters. He learned to read Asgardian script from Frigga, who was patient and exacting and praised him precisely when he deserved it. And he learned magic. From Frigga first, the careful, structured foundations, the way Asgardian seer worked with intention rather than wands, the way you had to mean things when you shaped them. Harry took to it with a naturalness that made Frigga's hands still sometimes when she watched him practice. Other children learning seer looked like they were wrestling with it. Harry looked like he was simply choosing to show what was already there. By the time he was 6, he could hold a shield construct without concentration. By 7, he could translate old Futhark on sight. By 8, he was working through Frigga's intermediate texts, not because anyone pushed him, but because he was bored with the beginner ones and saw no reason to pretend otherwise. "You're going to have to tell your father," Frigga told him, when she caught him halfway through a text that most Asgardian scholars didn't tackle until their 2nd century. "He knows," Harry said, not looking up. "Does he? He tested me last week. Put a 3rd-level containment rune in the doorway to the library to see if I'd notice." Frigga looked at him. "And did you?" "I dismantled it and put it back as a different rune before he got there so he didn't know I'd seen it." "Harry. I put it back as a rune that means welcome." Frigga was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Why?" Harry lowered the book and looked at her with eyes that were, at 8 years old, already doing that thing where they seemed to contain more than they should. "Because I knew he wanted to see if I'd find it. And I didn't want him to stop testing me." Frigga looked at her adopted son for a long moment. "He won't stop testing you," she said gently. "Not ever." "Good," Harry said, and went back to reading. Loki came into Harry's life the way Loki came into most things, sideways, uninvited, and via a form that was not his actual form. Harry was 9. He had gone to the library to return 3 books and found, sitting in his favorite reading chair, a golden-haired Asgardian woman he had never seen before, reading one of the books he'd left there the previous week and eating an apple with complete composure. Harry stopped in the doorway. The woman looked up. Her eyes were the exact color of sea ice. "You left a bookmark on page 432, she said. "Why stop there? The next chapter is better." "Who are you?" Harry asked. The woman tilted her head. "Guess." Harry looked at her. The apple. The deliberate choice of his chair. The specific book. The eyes, which were strange even for Asgard, and the way the room's ambient light didn't fall on her quite the way it should. "Loki," he said. A pause. The woman's expression shifted from amusement to something more genuine. Then the golden hair bled to black, the woman's angles sharpened into a man's, and Loki sat in Harry's chair in his actual form with his apple and his sea ice eyes, looking at Harry with what might have been respect. "How?" Loki said. "The light," Harry said. "Illusions change how light moves. Yours was almost perfect. But almost." Loki looked at the apple, then back at Harry. "Almost," he repeated. "I didn't want to say perfect and have you stop trying." This time Loki smiled, slow and real. "Oh," he said. "I'm going to like you." He stayed for 3 weeks, nominally visiting his parents, practically spending most of every day with Harry in the library or the training courtyard or the roof of the East Tower where Harry had set up a small observatory and where Loki demonstrated 17 different applications of Seer that Frigga hadn't taught yet, partly because she believed in proper progression and partly because several of them were technically illegal. "Technically illegal," Harry repeated, when Loki mentioned this. "By Asgardian statute. And you're showing me anyway." "I'm showing you of anyway. Whether you learn them is your own business." Loki set a small construct burning green in the air between them. "Pick it apart. Tell me how it works." Harry studied it. "You're teaching me by having me learn how to undo things. Understanding how to unmake something is the fastest way to understand how to make it." Loki watched him. Most Seer teachers don't know that. Or they know it and keep it to themselves because students who know how to unmake things are harder to control. Harry reached out and began gently, precisely peeling apart Loki's construct. "Is that why you're teaching me?" "I'm teaching you because you can take it apart," Loki said. "Most students push at it and nothing happens. You're pulling threads. Do you know the difference?" "Yes," Harry said. Pushing is imposing your will on the magic. Pulling is inviting it to cooperate. Loki was quiet for a moment. "Then, Frigga taught you that." "Frigga showed me that. I worked out the words myself." Loki watched the construct come apart in neat sections under Harry's hands, each component floating free before dissolving. He said nothing more. But when he left Asgard at the end of his visit, he pulled Harry into a quick, somewhat stiff embrace. Loki was not physically affectionate by nature and both of them knew it, and said quietly, "Don't let them make you small." Either of them. Any of them. Harry, who was 9 years old and already knew exactly what that meant, said, "I know." The year Harry turned 10, Odin began teaching him himself. Not in the formal Asgardian tradition, which would have put Harry in a classroom with other children and worked through a structured curriculum over decades. Odin took him to a room in the oldest part of the palace, below the main vaults, where the stones were so ancient they'd gone grey and the runes carved into the walls were the originals, not decorative, not commemorative, but functional, still faintly active after thousands of years. Harry touched the wall and felt them buzzing against his fingertips. "What is this place?" he asked. "The first room," Odin said. "The room where Asgardian seer was first practiced, in the time before the palace. Before the city." He stood in the middle of the room and looked at Harry. "This is where I will teach you what I know. Not what the scholars know. What I know." Harry looked at him. Odin, framed against those ancient stones, was a different thing here than he was on the throne. Bigger somehow, and older, and the blue light in his one eye was not the political light of a king but something rawer. "Everything?" Harry asked. "Everything you can carry." They worked through the winter and into spring. Odin taught him the language of runes not as symbols but as arguments. Each rune was a position, a point of view about reality, and seer was the process of negotiating between those positions and the actual shape of the world. Most people learned runes as vocabulary. Odin taught Harry to think in them the way a native speaker thinks in language, fluidly, without translation, meaning before word. Harry's wandless casting became something that people noticed. Servants who walked past the old room gave it a wider berth. The warriors three asked Thor, carefully, if perhaps the young prince's lessons were going well. Thor went and listened at the door once, and came away looking thoughtful. "He's correcting father," Thor told Frigga. Frigga didn't look up from her embroidery. "Yes. Not respectfully correcting. He's just, in the middle of a lesson he'll say, but that's not quite right, and then explain what he thinks is right and father is listening." "Yes. Father doesn't listen to corrections." "He does," Frigga said, "when the person making them is correct." The owl came in the summer Harry turned 11. It arrived viviparous, deposited by Heimdall with an expression of profound bemusement, a large tawny owl that had apparently spent the journey sitting on the guardian's shoulder and ignoring all attempts to relocate it. The owl marched across the throne room floor, ignored the doors, found Harry in the courtyard where he was practicing force projection with a training dummy, landed on his arm, and deposited a letter sealed with red wax and a crest. Harry looked at the seal. Then at the owl, which blinked at him with enormous orange eyes. "You're from the other magic world," Harry said. The owl ruffled its feathers in a way that seemed confirmatory. Harry broke the seal and read the letter. "Mr. H. Potter. We are pleased to inform you that you have been accepted to Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry." He read the whole thing twice. Then he stood very still in the courtyard for a moment, the late Asgardian sun warming the stone around him, the training dummy slowly dripping its enchanted stuffing onto the ground, and thought about what his mother had looked like, what he knew of her, the portraits Frigga had commissioned from descriptions Thor had given. Red hair. Kind face. A witch, his father had said, not Odin father, James father, the one who looked like him in old photographs, a gifted witch, everyone said, both of them were, the Potters were known for it. He went to find Odin. He found him, as expected, in the old room below the vault. Odin looked up when Harry came in and looked at the letter in Harry's hand, and his expression was the one Harry had learned to read over the years, the expression that meant he already knew. "You've been expecting this," Harry said. "Sit down," Odin said. Harry sat on the stone bench opposite his father and watched him. Odin looked at the letter. Looked at Harry. Looked at the runes on the walls, then back. "Your mother was a witch," Odin said. "Not an Asgardian seerworker." A Midgardian witch, of the tradition that school teaches. The tradition is real. The power is real. It is also, he paused, choosing the word carefully, incomplete. There are things that tradition understands about magic that we do not understand here. And there are things we understand that they do not. You want me to go, Harry said. I want you to have a choice, Odin said. But yes. I think you should go. Harry looked at the letter again. They'll have expectations, he said. Of who I am. What I can do. Yes. They'll expect a boy who's been living as an orphan on Midgard for 11 years. Who needs to be taught everything from the beginning. Yes. They won't expect me. Odin met his eyes. No, he said. They will not. A silence settled between them, the kind that carries weight and meaning without requiring words to hold it. I'll go, Harry said. I want to know that half of myself. My mum's half. Good, Odin said. But I'm not hiding what I am. I would be insulted if you tried, Odin said. Harry almost smiled. He stood, tucking the letter into his pocket. He was almost at the door when Odin spoke again. Harry. He turned. Odin was looking at him with that expression again, the one like recognition, like a long equation that had finally resolved. Whatever they tell you about yourself, he said. Whatever stories they have about who you are and what you are for, remember that you were made on Asgard. Not unmade. Made. Harry held his gaze. I know, he said. And he did, bone deep, in the way that you know things that have been true your entire life. He walked out into the Asgardian sunlight, letter in pocket, already thinking about what came next. Behind him in the old room, Odin Allfather sat alone for a long time, and the runes on the ancient walls pulsed once, warm and gold, the same color as the light that had surrounded a 4-year-old child sitting in the ruins of his house on a cold October night 7 years ago. The same color as the light that always surrounded things that were, against all odds, exactly where they were supposed to be. Chapter 2, The Otherworld. Diagon Alley smelled like candle wax, old parchment, and something Harry couldn't name, a low, sweet undercurrent beneath everything else, like the smell of a library but warmer, more alive. He stood at the entrance to the alley proper, Gringotts visible at the far end, and let the sensory information wash over him without reacting to it. Thor stood at his shoulder, roughly the width of a doorframe, wearing Midgardian clothes that fit him the way Midgardian clothes fit someone who had borrowed them from a person 2 sizes smaller. He'd been insistent about coming. Harry had been equally insistent that Thor wear something inconspicuous. They had reached a compromise that satisfied neither of them, Thor in dark trousers and a plain shirt that was doing heroic structural work across the shoulders, Mjolnir glamored into what looked like an unusually heavy walking stick. It's smaller than I expected, Thor said, looking down the alley. You say that about most places. Most places are smaller than expected. You could wait outside. I could, Thor agreed pleasantly, and did not move. Harry sighed and walked in. The reaction was not immediate. It built the way a tide builds, gradually and then all at once. The first few seconds were normal, a busy shopping alley, witches and wizards moving between storefronts, robes in every color, alls overhead, a cart trailing sparks. Then the nearest witch looked up at Harry and her face changed. Then the wizard at the apothecary door. Then a cluster of children ahead, one of whom pointed and whispered something that made all the others look. Then a woman dropped her shopping. Harry kept walking. He'd been stared at on Asgard too, the young Midgardian prince, the strange magic child, the boy who could do things that made Asgardian scholars ask uncomfortable questions over dinner. Staring was not new information. What was new was the murmuring. Potter. That's Harry Potter. Is that, it's him, it's actually, how is he, where has he, they know you, Thor observed quietly. Apparently. How? There was a letter, Harry said, keeping his voice low, from an important wizard named Dumbledore that was meant to be sent to me as an infant. About something that happened the night you found me. Loki intercepted one while he was here last winter and showed me. He paused. I'm apparently famous. For what? For surviving. Thor processed that. That seems like a low bar for fame. The thing that killed my parents, Harry said, had apparently never failed to kill anyone. I was the first. He said it without drama, just fact, the way Odin had taught him to carry heavy truths, not lightly, but steadily. The wizarding world calls it the night he was defeated. I'm the reason that he is lowercase now apparently. Thor stopped walking. Harry turned to look at him. Thor's face had done the thing it did when he was processing something that made him angry, not the loud performative anger that Harry had grown up watching, the thunder and lightning kind, but the quieter, more dangerous kind that lived behind his eyes. This world, Thor said carefully, has spent 11 years celebrating your survival without once checking to see where you were. Yes. A beat. I have opinions about that, Thor said. I know. You can have them later. Harry turned back toward Gringotts. Key first. The goblins were interesting. Harry had dealt with entities of significant power in Asgard, the Norns had opinions, the dwarves of Nidavellir were aggressively professional, Heimdall communicated primarily through long silences that contained more information than most people's speeches. But the goblins operated on a different frequency entirely. They were sharp, economical, and they looked at Harry with the kind of assessment usually reserved for something being weighed on a scale. The teller, Griphook, according to the placard, examined the key Harry had carried from Asgard, the one Dumbledore had apparently sent with the letter he never got to deliver and which Odin had simply kept, and then looked at Harry. Name, Griphook said. Harry Potter. The goblin's eyes moved from the key to Harry's face, running a quick inventory. They lingered on the scar, then moved to something else, something that wasn't visible, exactly, but which the goblin was clearly sensing in the way that certain beings sense things beyond the visual spectrum. There is, Griphook said, slowly, a secondary record attached to your account. Filed under Potterblack cross-reference. It has not been accessed in 11 years. I was not here, Harry said. What's in it? That would require a full account review. Griphook paused. It would also require a confirmation of identity beyond the key, given the unusual circumstances of your absence. Harry laid his hand flat on the counter. The wood of the counter, under his palm, lit faintly with that pale gold-white, the same runes that had surrounded him in Godric's hollow, the same signature that air had measured as hot and that Odin had looked at with recognition. It lasted only a moment. Just long enough. Griphook stared at his hand. Then at Harry. There was a long pause during which the goblin's expression moved through several different places before settling on something that looked, startlingly, like respect. Your account is confirmed, Griphook said. I will arrange the full review. Behind Harry, Thor made a small satisfied sound. The vault was extraordinary by any standard except Asgardian, which meant Harry walked through it taking genuine interest in the craftsmanship of the stonework while Thor stood at the cart with his arms folded and nodded approvingly at the general atmosphere of ancient wealth. The Potter vault held more than gold, there were books, sealed documents, a locked box that had a complicated ward on it that Harry mentally catalogued for later, and a note in the secondary record that mentioned a second vault, the Black Vault, which was sealed pending the outcome of certain legal proceedings. Harry made note of everything without touching anything except the gold he needed, and filed the rest away as information for later. Later was doing a lot of work in Harry's thinking today. Ollivanders came last, after robes and books and a trunk and a stop at the Owl Emporium where Harry spent 20 minutes in quiet conversation with a snowy owl that he eventually bought, not because she'd chosen him but because she was the one that had been watching him from the start, tracking him with amber eyes, and Harry had always respected that quality in anyone. He named her Solveig, which was Asgardian for Sun Path, and she bit him gently on the thumb to confirm the agreement. Ollivander's shop was dim and dusty and made entirely of the feeling that you were being watched by something with perfect memory. Wand boxes stacked to the ceiling on either side, a narrow path between, an old man appearing from somewhere at the back with eyes like mirrors, silver and reflective and uncannily still. "Mr. Potter," Ollivander said. He stopped a few feet away and looked at Harry the way Griphook had looked at him, that thorough non-visual assessment. Then his head tilted slightly to one side. "My," he said softly. "You've been somewhere interesting." "Asgard," Harry said. Ollivander blinked once. "Have you? Is that a problem for wand selection?" "On the contrary." The old man turned and began moving along the shelves with the unhurried confidence of someone who already knew where they were going. "Most students come to me as blank slates. Potential unrealized. Waiting to find the match that begins the process." He paused, hand resting on a shelf without pulling anything. "You are not a blank slate. Which makes this considerably more interesting. Should I be concerned?" "I've been waiting for someone like you for 31 years, Ollivander said, which was either comforting or alarming and Harry hadn't decided which. "Sit down." Harry sat. Thor, who had been examining the shop with the expression of someone trying to identify structural weaknesses out of professional habit, found a stool by the door and occupied it. The first wand Ollivander offered, 9 inches, mahogany, unicorn hair, registered Harry's touch with a shudder that made 3 boxes fall off a nearby shelf. Not a good sign, presumably. The second shuddered harder and one of the windows fogged. The third produced a crack that made Thor stand up. "Interesting," Ollivander said, not unnerved, apparently stimulated. "The core is responding but the wood is arguing. You have 2 magical signatures that are giving each other notes." "I'm aware. The seer and the native wizarding core are both present and both strong. A single core wand will always favor one over the other." He turned fully and went deeper into the shop, to a section that Harry noted was separated from the others by a gap, like a break in a bookshelf where someone had pulled a volume and not replaced it. He lifted a box from the very back, dark wood, unlabeled. "I made this," Ollivander said, coming back with it, "on the occasion that required it. I didn't know when the occasion would arrive. Only that it would." He opened the box. The wand inside was 11 inches, pale ash wood that had a faint silver grain running through it like frost on glass. The core, Ollivander informed him, was a double core, dragon heartstring and something he described only as an ancient thing, freely given, in a tone that discouraged further questions. Harry picked it up. The warmth was immediate, the way warmth is immediate when you come in from the cold to a fire that has been burning for a long time specifically in expectation of you. Not a surge, not an explosion. Just rightness, deep and resonant, settling into his bones like a key into a lock. Every wand box in the shop rattled once, simultaneously. Then went still. Ollivander looked at Harry's face. "Yes," he said quietly. "That's the one." "How much?" Harry asked. 7 galleons. A pause. "Consider it an investment in the continued existence of my shop ceiling." Harry placed 7 galleons on the counter. Ollivander handed over the box. Then he said, quietly, as Harry turned to leave, "Mr. Potter. The wand you're holding is the only one of its kind I have ever made, and the only one of its kind I expect I will make. The materials came to me." He paused again. "Not everything that comes to a craftsman is an accident." Harry held the old man's gaze. "I know," he said, "something about that." Outside, in the alley, Harry held the wand loosely in one hand and felt it sitting against his Asgardian seer without friction, like 2 streams that had found the same gradient. He turned it once. A neat, controlled spiral of light twisted out of the tip without particular effort and dissolved in the afternoon air. Thor looked at it. "Well," he said. "I know. Loki is going to be unbearable about this. He already is about everything. One more thing won't change the dynamic." Thor laughed, that genuine, full-body laugh that Harry had grown up hearing like weather, and clapped Harry on the shoulder hard enough that a passing witch stumbled from the displaced air. "Come," Thor said. "Food before the train." And I want to find those meat pastries that Midgardians make. The round ones. Pies. You've had 11 years of Asgardian cuisine and you want Midgardian pies. I've had 11 years of wanting Midgardian pies and finally being in the right realm. Thor was already walking with the purposefulness of a man who had identified an objective. The small round ones. With gravy. Harry tucked his wand into his pocket and followed his brother through the crowd, which parted, partly for Thor's considerable physical presence and partly, he noticed, for himself, people stepping back and staring with that particular quality of attention that meant they were seeing something they needed to process and couldn't quite. He let them look. He didn't look back. Not yet. King's Cross was organized chaos layered over deeper chaos, the specific brand of human complexity that came from large numbers of people all being urgently somewhere else simultaneously. Harry had a trolley. Harry had a trunk. Harry had Solveig in her cage and his wand in his pocket and Thor walking beside him being inconspicuous at roughly 6'3", and they found the barrier between platforms 9 and 10 without any difficulty. Thor looked at the barrier. I have walked through dimensional rifts, he said, that were more clearly marked than this. Should I go first? We'll go together, Thor said, in a tone that made it clear this was not negotiable. They went through together. The other side hit Harry in the chest like a wave, magic, concentrated and purposeful, 100 children and their families and their owls and their cats all soaked in it, the entire platform swimming in low-level enchantment. The Scarlet Hogwarts Express stood at the platform edge breathing steam. The noise was extraordinary. Harry stood for a moment taking it in. Children and parents, trunks being loaded, owls complaining, a pair of red-headed boys running the length of the platform for no apparent reason, an older girl with a badge on her robe striding after them looking resigned. A cluster of Slytherin-looking families near the far end, all pale robes and careful distance. A boy about Harry's age standing near the middle with his mother, brown bushy hair, a book already in her hand and another book in the boy's mother's hand and both of them deep in a conversation that looked academic. And the whispers, again. He'd been hearing them since Diagon Alley but on the platform they were louder, more crowded, more complex. He caught fragments, can't be, where has he been, is that really, and let them roll off. Thor crouched in front of him. Given Thor's height, this put them more or less face level, which they'd been doing since Harry was small enough to require it and which they'd never stopped doing out of habit. I have told your father's ravens to watch the area, Thor said quietly. You know how to reach me. You gave me an Asgardian communication stone, Harry said. Which is a piece of 9 realms technology in a school of 11-year-olds. Yes. Use it if needed. Thor. I know you don't need protection, Thor said. That is not why I'm giving it to you. He looked at Harry steadily. You are going somewhere I cannot follow. You are meeting a half of yourself I have never seen. That requires something. He placed a hand briefly on Harry's shoulder. This is so I can hear how it goes. Not so I can intervene. Harry looked at him. Thor, who had picked him up from a ruined house and flown him to another world and taught him to arm wrestle and how to read the wind and had never once tried to make him into something smaller or safer than what he was. Okay, Harry said. Communication stone. Fine. Thor straightened up. Also, he said, if anyone gives you trouble, I'll handle it. Naturally. But if you want someone else to handle it, Thor. Just saying the option exists. Go home, Harry said, smiling despite himself. Thor grinned, that enormous, sun-bright grin, and pulled Harry into a brief, crushing embrace. Then he stepped back, retrieved his glamoured walking stick, and walked toward the barrier with the rolling stride of a man entirely at peace with himself and the world. He turned once at the barrier. Pointed at Harry. The universal gesture for I see you, I'm watching, I'm proud. Then he walked through. Harry turned back to the platform. He loaded his trunk with the help of a young porter who tried very hard not to stare at his scar, settled Solveig's cage, and found a compartment at the front of the train that was still empty. He stowed his trunk, took his seat, and looked out the window at the platform. The girl with the bushy hair and the book was still out there, looking increasingly distressed about something, scanning the platform with the expression of someone who had asked a question and received no satisfactory answer. Harry watched her ask a passing guard something and get a shrug in response, and then she went back to her mother, and her expression was the very particular expression of someone who finds inefficiency physically painful. Harry could relate to that. The train whistle blew. Parents surged forward for last embraces. The girl kissed her mother and got on the train, and Harry heard her going compartment to compartment, asking about toads. Apparently, someone had lost a toad, and she opened his compartment door and looked in. "Have you seen a toad? A boy named Neville's lost one." "No," Harry said. "But I can find it if you like." She blinked. "How?" "Sit down," Harry said. "Train's moving." She hesitated. She was a person who evaluated things carefully. He could see that in the way she held the door, the quick assessment of the compartment, the slight pause before committing, and then sat down across from him with her book in her lap. The train lurched forward. Harry reached into his pocket and took out his wand. He held it loosely and closed his eyes for 2 seconds, not searching, exactly, but extending the same awareness he'd used all morning to read the platform, read Ollivander's shop, read the currents of magical activity around him. He stretched it down the train carriage by carriage and found in about the 4th one a small, frightened pulse of warmth that smelled like pond water. He opened his eyes. 4 carriages back, under a seat, left side near the window. The girl stared at him. "How did you do that?" "Locating charm," Harry said, not entirely accurately. "It's in Rowena Ravenclaw's foundational text on ambient magic mapping. Chapter 12, I think." "I haven't read that one," the girl said, with an expression of personal offense directed at herself for this gap in her knowledge. "It's interesting. Most wand magic practitioners don't bother with the theoretical foundations, which means they're missing about 40% of the applications." He paused. "I'm Harry, by the way." "Hermione Granger," she said. Then her eyes went to his forehead, involuntarily, the way everyone's did. "Oh," she said. Then, "Sorry, that was rude." "It's fine. I've read about you," she said, now clearly fighting between curiosity and politeness and losing the fight against curiosity, which Harry respected. "In modern magical history and the rise and fall of the dark arts and notable magical names of our time." "I haven't read those." "I could summarize, please don't." She stopped. Then, "Are you not interested in your own history?" "I'm interested in my own history," Harry said. "I'm not interested in other people's version of it." Hermione opened her mouth, closed it, and appeared to run a rapid internal recalibration. Then, "That's actually quite astute. Thank you. What's the owl's name?" "Solveig." "That's Norse." "Yes." She looked at him carefully, the way she'd look at a text that was presenting information inconsistent with her existing framework. "The books say you disappeared after you know who." She paused, "After the Dark Lord's defeat. Nobody knew where you went. There were all sorts of theories. Some people said Dumbledore had hidden you with Muggle relatives. Some people said you'd been taken to a safe house by the Order of the Phoenix. Professor McGonagall in one account." "Hermione," Harry said. "Yes. Where do you think I was?" She looked at his wand, which he'd set on the seat beside him. Then at the way the locating charm had worked, not quite like any standard charm she'd read about, she clearly registered the difference even if she couldn't name it. Then at his eyes, and the scar, and back to his eyes. "Somewhere different," she said slowly. "Somewhere the magic is," she searched for the word, "older. Or different. Or both." "Both," Harry said. She sat with that for a moment. Then, "Will you tell me about it?" "Eventually," Harry said. "If you're interesting enough." A short silence. Then, to her considerable credit, Hermione Granger smiled. "I'll try to be," she said. They reached Ron Weasley at some point past the midpoint of the journey, when the red-headed boy from the platform squeezed into their compartment looking for somewhere to sit, his robes slightly disheveled and his ears going pink with what turned out to be the aftermath of a card trick gone wrong. He sat down, said his name was Ron and that Harry's was brilliant because of the whole you-know-who thing, and then ate half Harry's share of the trolley cart without apparently noticing he was doing it, which Harry found entirely inoffensive. He didn't need the cauldron cakes anyway. Ron was uncomplicated in a way Harry found refreshing. He didn't have an agenda. He wasn't performing anything. He talked about Quidditch with the specific fervor of someone who had grown up with 6 siblings and needed to have at least one strong opinion that was entirely his own, and he was genuinely funny without seeming to know he was funny, which was the best kind. Fred and George bet me a sickle I couldn't sit in the same compartment as you for more than 5 minutes without asking about the scar, Ron said cheerfully. Have you been counting? 7 minutes, Ron said. I'm winning. Then why did you tell me? Because now you know I'm not going to ask, so you won't be sitting there waiting for it. Harry looked at him. That's actually quite considerate. Ron went slightly redder. Mum says be considerate, he said, in the tone of someone who has been told this many times and sometimes even agrees with it. Your mum sounds sensible. She's terrifying, Ron said proudly. They passed through a comfortable silence. Outside the window the English countryside was going dark, the train pushing north into the evening, and Harry leaned against the glass and watched the lights of small towns passing and thought about what was coming. Hogwarts. A school. A classroom. A world that had been operating for 11 years on a specific idea of who he was and what he was for. He turned the thought over carefully, the way Odin had taught him to turn things over before acting, not to hesitate, but to understand the shape of what he was walking into. There would be expectations. There would be tests and curricula and a system built on assumptions about what 11-year-olds could do and what they needed to learn. There would be adults who thought they knew best, because adults in positions of authority always thought they knew best, and some of them would be right and some of them would be very wrong, and knowing the difference was going to be important. There would also, apparently, be moving staircases, which Ron had mentioned with a kind of weary familiarity, and ghost teachers, and a sorting ceremony involving a hat. Harry was looking forward to the hat, actually. He was curious about it. A sentient artifact designed to assess magical potential and personality, that had real craft behind it, whoever had made it. He wanted to see how it worked up close. You're very quiet, Hermione said. Thinking. About what? Harry looked out the window. The train went through a tunnel and the window went dark and showed him his own reflection, ghost pale against the black, green eyes and wild hair and the scar like a signature. About how strange it is, he said, to be going somewhere that's been expecting you for 11 years. Is it strange? I should think it would be exciting. It's both, Harry said. The strange part is that they've been expecting someone who doesn't exist. Hermione looked at him and didn't say anything for a moment. Then, who do they think you are? The boy who lived, Harry said. Whatever that means. And who are you actually? Harry turned from the window. The reflection disappeared as the train came back out into the evening air, and he was solid and present and exactly where he was. Still working that out, he said, which was both true and not true in equal measure. Hogwarts, when it appeared above the lake, stopped Harry mid-breath. He'd been raised on Asgard. He'd grown up in a palace of gold and ancient stone that sat above a city built on the edge of the world. He was not easily impressed by architecture. But Hogwarts was something else, not grand in the Asgardian way, not built to announce itself, but alive in a way that very few structures he'd encountered were alive. The magic was in the stone itself, deep and accumulated, centuries of children and teachers and learning and conflict and memory all absorbed into the walls until the castle breathed with it. It was, Harry thought, the most thoroughly used piece of architecture he'd ever seen. Used and therefore loved, in the particular way things are loved that have been necessary to people for a long time. He stood in the boat crossing the lake and felt the castle's magic washing over him, different from Asgardian seer, different from the ambient magic of Diagon Alley, older in one sense and younger in another, and his own magic reached toward it the way a hand reaches toward warmth. Beside him, Hermione was vibrating with excitement she was managing through rigid posture. On his other side, Ron was looking at the castle with an expression of uncomplicated wonder that he would probably deny later. Harry just looked. He looked carefully, the way Odin had taught him to look at things he wanted to understand, taking in more than the surface. The runes worked into the castle's foundations, visible to him as dim golden lines running through the stone, invisible to everyone else, probably. The layered wards, old and newer and older still, generations of headmasters adding and patching and reinforcing. A magical ecosystem as complex as anything he'd encountered in the realms. "It's brilliant," Ron breathed. "Yes," Harry agreed. "It is." The great hall was full of candlelight and students and the low roar of 100 conversations, and Harry walked in with the first years and felt every conversation tilt and then restart at a higher frequency. The older students craned to see. At the staff table, he clocked the teachers, one face that he recognized from research, white-bearded and half-moon spectacled, watching Harry's entrance with an expression of carefully managed intensity. Dumbledore. Blue eyes, sharp and measuring behind the benevolent presentation, the kind of eyes that had spent a very long time being underestimated by people who looked only at the beard. Harry met those eyes briefly. Didn't look away first. Then the hat. An ancient, patched thing, sitting on a stool, which after a moment opened a tear near its brim and sang. Harry listened to the song, surprisingly sophisticated, he noted, internally, the rhyme scheme was more complex than it looked on first pass, and waited. The sorting went alphabetically. Harry stood in the line and watched his new classmates go, a boy named Longbottom who fell trying to sit on the stool but seemed actually fine about the hat's decision, sorted into Gryffindor after a long pause. A girl named McDougal. A boy with a pointed face who went to Slytherin quickly and confidently and sat with the immediate ease of someone landing exactly where they expected. Hermione went to Gryffindor and sat down with the relieved posture of someone whose first-choice hypothesis has been confirmed. Then Professor McGonagall called, "Potter, Harry." The great hall went completely, absolutely silent. Harry walked forward and sat on the stool. Professor McGonagall placed the hat on his head, and it dropped down over his eyes, and he sat in the warm cloth dark. "Well," said the hat, and its voice in his head was rich and layered, genuinely old, stitched through with centuries of contact. "I haven't had one like you in, how long?" Harry asked silently. "Can't quite remember," the hat said. "That's how long." A pause, during which Harry had the distinct sense of being read, not superficially but thoroughly, the way an expert reader reads a complex text. "You've been on Asgard." "Yes." "And before that, Godric's Hollow, and before that, there's something unusual here about the magic. Your core. It's layered." "I know. 2 traditions. Both fully developed. That's not supposed to be possible in someone your age. A lot of things I do aren't supposed to be possible." The hat was quiet for a moment. "I'm going to have to think about this." A longer pause. "Ravenclaw would suit the intellect. Slytherin would suit the ambition, and you do have ambition, even if it doesn't look like what I usually see in that house. Gryffindor, where do people who don't fit the categories go?" Harry asked. Another silence, and Harry got the impression the hat was amused. "They usually do, in my experience. You could go to any of the 4. You'd thrive in any of the 4. But you're not really asking where you'd thrive. No. You're asking where you'd be most useful." "Yes." The hat took its time. Harry sat quietly and let it, because good decisions deserved their process. "I'll tell you something," the hat said, "that I don't often volunteer. There's a thread in this school right now. Running through the walls. Something wrong, something hidden, something dangerous enough that the headmaster is monitoring it carefully and not telling anyone. And the children who are going to be closest to it, when it matters, are in, Gryffindor, the hat shouted aloud. The Gryffindor table erupted. Harry set the hat back on the stool carefully, it tipped itself at him, just slightly, and walked to the red and gold table where Hermione was clapping and Ron was grinning from 3 seats down. At the staff table, Dumbledore watched Harry sit down. His expression had not changed from that careful, managed intensity. Harry poured himself a glass of water and did not look back up at the staff table. But he thought about what the hat had said. Something wrong. Something hidden. Something dangerous. He thought about the layered wards in the castle's stone, and how one section, deep below the ground, beneath the dungeons, accessible through a corridor on the 3rd floor, had felt different. Not damaged. Not weak. Intentional. Deliberately separated from the castle's natural magical current. Like something had been placed there and then sealed off, and the sealing itself was newer than the rest. He cut a piece of roast chicken and ate it and looked up at the enchanted ceiling showing stars above the great hall. Something hidden, the hat had said. Harry was, after all, raised by a man who had learned secrets by hanging upside down from the world tree for 9 days. He could be patient. Chapter 3, Sorting Chaos. The dungeons of Hogwarts were significantly colder than the rest of the castle, which Harry found interesting from an architectural standpoint and mildly aggravating from a practical one. He stood in potions on the 2nd day of term with his sleeves rolled up while everyone else had pulled their robes tight, and studied the man at the front of the room with the same attention he gave things that were worth understanding. Severus Snape was worth understanding. Not because he was powerful, though he was. His magical signature had a precision to it that most people mistook for coldness, a control so complete that almost nothing bled out accidentally. Not because he was cruel, though he could be, the cruelty of someone who had decided very early that softness was a liability and had restructured everything around that decision. Snape was worth understanding because he was a man performing a very specific, very practiced version of himself, and the performance had been going so long that it had started to eat the person inside it. Harry recognized that, having spent time around Loki, who had perfected that exact architecture. Potter, Snape said, without looking up from the register. His voice had a carrying quality, textured and deliberate, built for maximum effect in stone rooms. Our new celebrity. The class went very still, the particular stillness of a group waiting to see how a confrontation resolves. Harry said nothing. Snape looked up. His eyes were flat and black and measuring. I see fame doesn't encourage punctuality. I've been here for 4 minutes, Harry said. Class started 3 minutes ago. By my count that's early. A shorter silence. 5 points from Gryffindor, Snape said, for impertinence. That seems inconsistent, Harry said, in exactly the same tone. If you deduct points for accurate statements, what's the incentive for accuracy? The class had stopped breathing. Snape put down the register and looked at Harry properly for the first time. It was a look Harry had received from a number of people at a number of points in his life, teachers, warriors, the occasional political figure who had come to Asgard and encountered him during a lesson, the look of someone recalibrating. Snape had walked in expecting one thing and had found something else entirely and was now running a very fast internal process about what to do about it. Sit down, Mr. Potter, he said finally. Harry sat. Snape began his introduction to potions, which was good, legitimately good, Harry noted with genuine appreciation. The man understood the chemistry of what he was teaching in a way that most magical practitioners didn't bother with, the why beneath the how, the structural reasons that a bezoar neutralized poison rather than just the fact that it did. Harry found himself listening more carefully than he'd expected to. He also found Snape watching him during the lecture, not with the sweeping authority gaze that teachers use to check attention generally, but specifically, repeatedly, the way you watch something you haven't identified yet. Harry took notes. The notes were in Asgardian script, which was partly habit and partly because they fit more information in less space, which was practically useful in small notebooks. He noticed Hermione noticed this from 2 seats away and visibly restraining herself from asking about it. When Snape called on him during the Q&A portion, the Bezoar question, asked with what seemed designed to be a humiliating sharpness, "Tell me, Potter, where would you look if I told you to find me a Bezoar?" Harry answered it and the next two follow-up questions and then sat back while Snape moved on with the expression of a man who had fired a weapon and found it had shot the wrong direction. "Nicely done," Hermione murmured. "I just answered the questions." "You answered them correctly and at length," she said. "He hates that." "Why?" "Because he likes being the most knowledgeable person in the room." Harry looked at the front of the class, where Snape was setting up the first practical exercise with smooth, efficient movements, explaining the task to a Slytherin boy named Malfoy who had the practiced quality of a person who has spent his life getting instruction from adults and knows how to make it count for him socially. "He could be the most knowledgeable person in the room in most rooms," Harry said. "He's genuinely good. Then why doesn't he act like it?" Harry thought about that. About Loki, performing dangerous indifference over something much more complicated. "Because he had something to prove to someone a long time ago," he said, "and the person's gone but the proving never stopped." Hermione looked at him. "That's either very perceptive or you're making that up." "Possibly both." The potion itself was a simple boil cure, entry level, designed to assess basic technique. Harry worked through it with Hermione, who had read the textbook 3 times and knew every step theoretically and needed only to apply the physical adjustment of actually doing it, which she accomplished with methodical precision. Harry worked alongside her and thought about Asgardian alchemy, which ran on related but different principles, and made 2 modifications to the listed procedure that weren't in the book but that his understanding of the underlying chemistry suggested would produce a more stable compound. When Snape collected their sample, he held it up to the light and looked at it for a long moment. The texture was different from the standard result, smoother, more consistent, the color a shade more vivid. He set it down without comment. But Harry noticed that he kept it separate from the other samples, labeled specifically rather than generically. Which meant he intended to study it. Good, Harry thought. Professor Flitwick was delightful. Small and enthusiastic and genuinely curious in the way that the best teachers were genuinely curious about his own subject as if he'd been teaching it for 30 years and was still finding new things in it, which was, Harry discovered, because he had been and was. He also, notably, was a former dueling champion, which explained the particular quality of his movements, the unconscious balance, the way he tracked everyone in the room simultaneously while appearing to look only at the board. He recognized Harry, of course, and went pink about it and knocked over a stack of books, which Harry helped him collect without making anything of it. Charms was the class where Harry's wand magic was most directly testable against the Hogwarts curriculum, and he found it both familiar and fascinating in the way that looking at the same landscape from a different elevation was familiar and fascinating. The mechanisms of wand work were different from wandless seer, not less powerful, not less sophisticated, just differently structured, built around the relationship between the caster and the focus rather than between the caster and the ambient field. When Flitwick got to the first practical exercise, Wingardium Leviosa, the levitation charm, a straightforward demonstration of directed magical will, Harry felt his wand settle warm against his palm and thought carefully about the mechanism before doing anything. He wanted to understand the how before the result. The feather on his desk rose about 8 inches, then another foot, then continued until it was pressing against the ceiling. "Oh my," Flitwick said, from somewhere behind him. Harry brought it back down carefully. Hermione, beside him, had gotten her feather about 2 feet up on the second try and was eyeing Harry's with the expression of someone updating a competitive benchmark. "Mr. Potter," Flitwick said, climbing onto his standing block to be more or less at Harry's shoulder height and peering at him with enormous magnified eyes, that was quite extraordinary. "You've done some charms work before." "A different tradition," Harry said. "But yes. Could I ask, the way you held your wand at the start? That wasn't the standard grip." "No," Harry said. "I was orienting it." Flitwick blinked. "Orienting it. The wand has a directional preference," Harry said. "Like a compass needle. If you align it with the ambient magical current before a casting, the charm integrates more cleanly." He paused. "It's not in the standard texts." It comes from Asgardian seer theory. The principle is the same but the application is different for wand magic. The entire class had stopped working. Flitwick was looking at Harry with the particular expression of a brilliant person encountering a beautiful problem. Would you be willing to demonstrate that principle more thoroughly? Sometime outside of class, perhaps. Of course, Harry said. Extraordinary, Flitwick said softly, apparently to himself. Simply extraordinary. Transfiguration was the third class, and Professor McGonagall was the third teacher to require reassessment. She'd already made an impression, appearing as a cat on her desk when the class entered, a transformation so complete and effortless that Harry had known what it was immediately and found it elegant rather than impressive, though he appreciated the elegance. She'd transformed back, given a brief and precise lecture on the fundamental theory of transfiguration, and then set the class to work on turning matchsticks into needles. Around Harry, students were producing varying degrees of metallic matchstick, some with a silvery sheen, most unchanged. Neville Longbottom, 2 seats over, appeared to be having a philosophical disagreement with the concept itself. Harry held the matchstick and thought about what transfiguration was, really, at its root. He'd done things with Loki and Frigga that called into question the boundaries between object states, not exactly transfiguration in the Hogwarts sense, but related, fundamentally questions about the nature of form and whether form was fixed or suggested. The principle in Asgardian sorcery was that all matter was argument, a matchstick argued for being wood and sulfur, and transfiguration was the process of making a more persuasive counterargument. He turned the matchstick into a needle in about 4 seconds. Perfect, standard needle, sharp and bright. He turned it back into a matchstick. Then into a needle again, this time with a different grain on the metal. He was curious whether the crystalline structure was dictated by the spell or by the caster's intent, and it turned out to be the latter, which was interesting. He made the needle hollow. Made it thicker. Made it not quite a needle and not quite a matchstick but something in between, and that was harder, actually, because the magical argument preferred resolved states. He turned it back into a matchstick and put it on the desk by the time McGonagall reached his row. She stopped. Looked at the matchstick. Looked at him. "You've been holding this matchstick for 10 minutes, she said. "I was experimenting," Harry said. "The exercise is to turn it into a needle." "I did that," Harry said. "Then I was curious about whether the transfiguration spell defines the target state or whether the caster's intent does." "And?" "Intent does, within limits. The spell creates a framework but it's not deterministic. The caster defines the specifics." He paused. "Which means there are more applications than the standard ones listed in the textbook, because most people use predefined target states out of habit rather than necessity." McGonagall studied him for a long moment. She had a quality of stillness that Harry associated with people who had seen a great deal and learned to process it internally rather than externally. "Show me," she said. Harry turned the matchstick into a needle. Then turned it into a nail. Then a pin. Then a compass needle, same size, same weight roughly, but oriented magnetically. McGonagall held it up and it swung to north. She set it down. "Mr. Potter," she said quietly, so only he could hear, "you are either going to be the most fascinating student this school has ever had or the most disruptive, and I suspect possibly both." "My father said something similar," Harry said. She looked at him. The word father landed in a complicated way on her face. He could see her processing which father he meant and arriving at the correct answer and having feelings about it that she was not, being McGonagall, going to express in the middle of a transfiguration class. "After class," she said instead, "I'd like a word." "Of course, Professor." The word, after class, was McGonagall sitting at her desk and Harry sitting across from her, and a silence that McGonagall used as a diagnostic tool with considerable skill. "I knew your parents," she said. "I know," Harry said. "You were their head of house. You've read the history." "I prefer primary sources," Harry said. "Thor met my parents once, very briefly. He described them." Something shifted in McGonagall's expression at Thor. She was clearly composing a question about Asgard and choosing not to ask it because there was something more immediate, more personal. "You are not what I expected," she said finally. "No one is." "I mean that specifically," she said. "The Harry Potter I expected, the child who survived you know who, I expected trauma. I expected someone who needed significant support. Who needed to catch up." She was precise and honest about it, which Harry respected. "You are clearly not that person." "I was that person," Harry said. "For about the first 3 days. And then? And then Thor brought me to Asgard and Frigga held me and Odin taught me things and I grew up." He said it simply. "Trauma doesn't go away, Professor. But it doesn't have to define the shape of everything else." McGonagall was quiet for a moment. "What do you want from Hogwarts?" she asked. "Honestly. You clearly don't need the basic curriculum." Harry considered the honest answer. "My mother was a witch," he said. "A real one, trained here, by this tradition. I've spent 7 years with the other half. I want the whole thing." He paused. "I also want to understand why something is wrong with the third-floor corridor." McGonagall went very still. "The wards are different there," Harry said. "Newer, deliberately isolated. Something was put there at the start of term and separated from the castle's natural flow. The castle itself is slightly uncomfortable about it, if you listen carefully." "How?" McGonagall said, in a voice that had gone very controlled, "do you know that?" "The same way I can do a compass point transfiguration on first attempt," Harry said. "I've been studying advanced magical theory since I was 5. He held her gaze. "I'm not going to interfere with it. I just want to know what it is. Because if it's dangerous and I should be aware of it, I'd rather know than not." McGonagall looked at him for a very long time. Then she said, "The third-floor corridor is off-limits to all students. I would strongly advise you to respect that." "Noted," Harry said. "I just didn't want you to think I hadn't noticed." "Is there anything," McGonagall said, with the expression of someone recalibrating very carefully, "else you've noticed?" "Lots of things," Harry said pleasantly. "I'll let you know if any of them become urgent." He stood to leave. At the door he paused. "Professor," he said. "You taught my mother. Was she good?" McGonagall's expression, for one unguarded moment, was full of something that looked like grief and pride in equal measure. "She was brilliant," she said. "One of the best I ever taught. Natural talent that she worked harder than anyone to develop." "I've been told I'm like her," Harry said. "You are," McGonagall said. "And entirely unlike her, simultaneously." "Yeah," Harry said. "I know." Dumbledore found Harry on the 5th day. Or rather, Harry was in the library and Dumbledore came to the library and the meeting was technically accidental in the same way that Odin's accidental meetings with Harry in the library had been accidental, which was to say, not at all. Harry was working through Foundations of British Wand Sorcery, 1100 to 1400 CE, which was a significantly more interesting text than its title suggested, when a chair across the table was occupied and he looked up into half-moon spectacles and blue eyes and the beard. "Harry," Dumbledore said warmly. "Professor Dumbledore," Harry said. "I hope you don't mind if I join you." The library was otherwise empty. Harry gestured at the already occupied chair. "You've already joined me." Dumbledore smiled. "I have been meaning to speak with you since your arrival. Events conspired to prevent it sooner." He looked at Harry with those sharp benevolent eyes. "I must say, your arrival was rather a surprise to us all." "I imagine so. We had been trying to locate you," Dumbledore said. "For some years. I had a letter delivered when you were barely a year old, to an address, certain arrangements that I had made for your safety, and when it became clear that you were not at that address, we searched." He paused. "It took us some time to understand that you had gone somewhat further afield than we anticipated." "Asgard," Harry said. "Yes. Something moved behind Dumbledore's eyes, not discomfort exactly, but adjustment, the movement of a careful mind updating a long-held model. Thor found you. Yes. And took you home. He did. And Odin Allfather raised you. A pause. As a Prince of Asgard. As his son, Harry said, with an evenness that held a boundary inside it. Dumbledore looked at him. Then he smiled again, and this smile was different, less performance, more genuine, the smile of someone encountering something they find legitimately interesting. I won't pretend, he said, that this was the path I planned for you. I know, Harry said. I've read the accounts of what the path you planned looked like. He kept his voice neutral. I don't think I was going to thrive with the Dursleys, Professor. A brief silence. No, Dumbledore said quietly. You are perhaps right about that. He paused again. I had reasons for the choices I made. I believe they were good reasons. I suspect you may disagree with some of them. Some of them, Harry agreed. And the rest? Harry looked at him. The rest were probably right, given the information you had. He closed his book and leaned back in his chair. I'm not angry with you, Professor, if that's what you're testing. Dumbledore blinked. Just slightly. I had a good life, Harry said simply. A remarkable life. Whatever the path you planned would have produced, I think this produced something better. So I don't have an argument with the outcome. He paused. I do have questions about what comes next, and I expect you have a version of what comes next already built. I'd like to understand it before it affects me. Dumbledore was quiet for a longer moment than Harry expected. When he spoke, it was with a different quality, more honest, less staged. You are very direct. I was raised by someone who had one eye and no patience for implication. Something tugged at Dumbledore's mouth. Indeed. He laced his fingers together on the table. I will be direct in return. There are forces in the wizarding world that have not ended. Not entirely. The defeat of Voldemort 11 years ago was significant. It was not permanent. I have been watching for signs of his return. And I am, taking precautions. The third-floor corridor, Harry said. Dumbledore looked at him. You are observant. I am trained. Yes. A pause. What do you know about it? I know something important was placed there, Harry said. I know it's being protected by layered enchantments, some extremely sophisticated. I know the castle is slightly unhappy about it, which means whoever designed the protection didn't fully consult the existing wards. He paused. I'm guessing it's something that Voldemort would want. Given that you're preparing for his return. Dumbledore studied him for a long moment. You have worked this out in 5 days. 4, Harry said. The 5th day I was just confirming. And what do you intend to do with this information? Nothing yet, Harry said. I told you, I'm not here to interfere. I'm here to learn and to understand my mother's world. He held the older man's gaze. But if something in that corridor becomes a threat to the students in this school, I won't stand back because someone told me the corridor is off limits. Dumbledore held his gaze for a long moment. Then he leaned back and looked, briefly, at the ceiling. You know, he said, in all the years I imagined meeting you, I had a great many prepared things to say. How many of them are you still planning to use? Very few, Dumbledore said, with a laugh that was quiet and genuine. Very few, indeed. The first flying lesson was supposed to be unremarkable. It was supposed to be a basic introduction to broom work, aimed at 11-year-olds who had never flown, or at most had flown in supervised circumstances. Madame Hooch ran them with brisk competence, lining up the first years on the pitch in the grey October air and walking them through the standard protocol. Harry had, of course, flown before. Not on a broom, on Thor's back, holding a fistful of red cape, which he was aware was significantly more absurd and also significantly more comfortable than the handle of a school broomstick. He got the broom on the first call-up with no difficulty and waited. What he hadn't planned for was Draco Malfoy. Malfoy had been a persistent background presence for the first week, pointed and deliberate in clearly positioning himself, placing pieces the way someone had taught him to place them, watching who aligned with whom. He'd made a run at Harry on the second day, the kind of introduction that was also an audition. A better class of friend is available to you, Potter, if you make the right choice, and Harry had been politely uninterested, which had shifted Malfoy from possible ally to determined adversary in about 90 seconds. Today he apparently decided the flying lesson was an opportunity. It started with Neville. Neville's broom activated too early, rose sharply, unseated him, and carried him in a panicked loop before he lost his grip. He fell about 8 feet onto the hard ground of the pitch and yelped, and Madame Hooch was with him immediately, worried about his wrist, and the broken thing was a remembrall, a glass ball Neville had been holding, which Malfoy picked up from where it had rolled, spinning it on one finger, watching Harry with a calculation that was somewhat more sophisticated than most 11-year-olds. "I'll take that," Harry said. He didn't move from his broom position. He just held out his hand and looked at Malfoy with the flat patience of someone who has been taught to read situations 2 moves ahead and has already read this one. "Oh," Malfoy said. "Come and take it." "I'd rather not make this more dramatic than it needs to be," Harry said. "It's not yours. Give it back." "Or what?" Around them, the first years were watching with the fascinated attention of children watching something they can't look away from. Hooch had taken Neville toward the school. The pitch was unsupervised. Malfoy threw the remembrall in a long arc toward the school building. Without getting on the broom. Harry reached out with his left hand, the hand not holding the broom, and the remembrall stopped. Just stopped, mid-arc, about 20 feet away and 12 feet up, hanging in the air with a faint pale light around it. He floated it back to himself, gently, and set it in his pocket. The silence on the pitch was total. "Wandless," said a voice. Hermione, quiet and precise. She was watching Harry with her notebook in her hand and an expression of someone whose world has just reorganized slightly. Malfoy had gone the color of chalk. He was staring at Harry with an expression Harry recognized. It wasn't fear exactly, though that was in there. It was reassessment. The same rapid recalibration that had happened with Snape, with Flitwick, with McGonagall. The realization that the model was wrong. "That's not," Malfoy started. "Wandless seer," Harry said pleasantly. "It's not in the Hogwarts curriculum. Asgardian tradition." He looked at Malfoy with no particular hostility. "I'm not your enemy, Malfoy. I'm also not going to be what you're planning for me to be. So you can keep making moves or you can adjust your thinking. Either way is fine with me." Malfoy stared at him for another long moment. Then turned and walked back to his broom position. Ron sidled up to Harry's left shoulder. "Did you just, with your hand?" "Yes." "Without your wand?" "Yes." "Is that, can people do that?" "Some people," Harry said. "With training." Ron looked at the sky where the remembrall had been. Then at Harry. Then at the sky again. "Wicked," he said, with enormous sincerity. Quidditch was the next complication. Oliver Wood found Harry the same afternoon, with the energy of a man who had been given wonderful news and a mission simultaneously, and explained about the seeker position and the rule about first years not having their own brooms with a barely concealed urgency that suggested rules were obstacles to be managed rather than followed. McGonagall, apparently, had seen Harry catch the remembrall and had made a recommendation. Harry listened to the explanation about Quidditch. He'd read the rules during the first week, so he had the structure, and then said he would play. "You don't want to think about it?" Wood asked. "I've been thinking about it since I read the rules the first week," Harry said. "It's interesting. A game that requires individual excellence and team coordination simultaneously, with a randomizing element in the snitch that prevents any outcome from being fully predictable. I want to play." Wood stared at him. "Also," Harry said, "flying is good." "Right," Wood said. "Yes. Brilliant. The Nimbus 2000 arrived the next morning, which was extraordinary by school standards. Harry looked at it with genuine appreciation. Beautiful engineering, the balance was exceptional, and rode it that afternoon in a private session with Wood. He was on the pitch alone first, Wood watching from the stands, and he took the broom straight up, fast, higher than the stands in about 3 seconds, and stopped there, hanging in the cold air with the castle spread below him and the lake glittering in the pale afternoon light. He sat still for a moment. The wind was coming from the northeast, clean and cold, the kind of wind that existed above weather patterns, and he knew that wind like an old acquaintance. He was very high above a castle full of children learning magic, in a country he'd been born in and left, and below him was a school built by 4 extraordinary people over 1,000 years ago, full of magic as old and layered as anything in Asgard, and the whole thing was complicated and human and alive, and he was 11 years old and felt, in this particular moment, very clearly and specifically here. He pointed the nimbus at the ground and Dove. Wood, in the stands, made a sound that was mostly vowels. Hermione was waiting for him when he came back in the corridor outside the Gryffindor common room, with the look that meant she had been thinking carefully about something for a while and had arrived at a position. "The wandless magic," she said, without preamble. "Hello to you too," Harry said. "Can you teach me?" she said. He looked at her. She was holding her textbook and her notes, and her chin was up with that particular quality of Hermione's that meant she had decided to want something and was now committed to getting it. "It's not quick," he said. "I know. It's not in any of the Hogwarts texts. I know. It requires learning Asgardian seer theory, at least the foundational principles, and those aren't written in English." "I can learn the language," she said immediately. Then, catching herself, "If you'd teach me." Harry looked at her for a moment. This was what she was, really, this forward-tilted hunger toward knowledge, the same impulse that had made Odin hang upside down from the world tree. You can't choose it and you can't manufacture it, and when you see it in someone it's like recognizing a specific color. "Saturday morning," he said. "Library. Bring parchment." The look on Hermione's face was the look of someone who has asked for the sky and been told to bring something to write with. "Thank you," she said, and managed to make it sound like an academic statement and an entirely genuine human thing simultaneously. Ron found Harry outside the Great Hall that evening, slightly breathless from running, with the specific expression of someone who has just discovered news he considers urgent. "Percy," Ron said, "thinks you should know, there are people asking about you. In Hogsmeade. 3 people, not students, 2 days ago, asking the innkeeper about the boy who lived and where he was living and whether he'd been seen in the area." Harry went still. "What kind of people?" "Percy says they were wearing cloaks that were too heavy for the weather. And they paid with coins he didn't recognize." Ron's freckled face was serious. "Coins that were old. Really old." Harry thought about that. Then, did he describe them physically? 2 were normal looking. Well, normal for people trying not to be noticed. 1 was thin and tall, and Percy said the man at the inn went quiet when he came near, like the temperature dropped. Not Voldemort's followers, or not primarily. The coin detail was wrong. Something else. "Thank Percy," Harry said. "And tell him not to say anything to anyone else." "Should I worry?" Ron asked. He asked it directly and without theatrics, which was one of the things Harry had come to appreciate about him. "No," Harry said. "You seem very calm." "I'm not calm because of them," Harry said honestly. "I'm not calm because I don't know yet who they are. Those are 2 different things." He reached into the pocket where the Asgardian communication stone sat warm and heavy. He held it for a moment. Then put it back. He had a better first step. He found Dumbledore that same evening, or allowed himself to be found by Dumbledore in the corridor near the 3rd-floor staircase, which was where Dumbledore walked in the evenings based on the pattern Harry had noticed across the first week. "Strangers in Hogsmeade," Harry said, when the headmaster was close enough to hear a quiet voice. 2 days ago. Asking about me. Paying in coins a local didn't recognize. Dumbledore stopped. His expression was suddenly, entirely focused. How many? 3. One of them had a cold effect. Cold, Dumbledore repeated. The temperature around him dropped, Harry said. Percy Weasley noticed it. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. Then, you are trusting me with this. I'm sharing information with the person best positioned to act on it, Harry said. That's different from trust. Though I'm not opposed to trust eventually. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. The people asking about you, I believe I know who sent them. I will look into it. There's a connection to what's in the corridor, isn't there, Harry said. Not directly. But the same larger picture. You are, Dumbledore said, either going to make my work significantly easier or considerably more complex. Probably both, Harry said. Yes, Dumbledore said, with the same tired, genuine smile he'd produced in the library. I rather thought so. He walked on down the corridor. Harry watched him go and thought about 3 figures in Hogsmeade asking about him in old coins, and about the thing locked under the school, and about Voldemort somewhere not dead, and about how all of these things were obviously connected and all of them were moving. Good, he thought. He preferred things in motion. Still, things were harder to understand. He went back to the common room, where Ron was losing badly at chess and Hermione was reading and the fire was warm, and sat down in one of the wide chairs, and pulled out the Asgardian Seer Foundation's text he'd been meaning to translate for Hermione, and started working on it. The castle breathed around him, ancient and alive, and 3 floors below something pulsed behind stone, and upstairs behind his pillowcase an 11-year-old boy from Godric's Hollow had a communication stone that linked to the 9 realms, and it was all, he thought, deeply interesting. He turned a page and kept working. Chapter 4, The Underbelly of 2 Worlds. November came to Hogwarts the way it always did, sideways and wet, the kind of cold that had opinions about you personally. The lake went grey and the grounds went to mud and the castle's enchanted windows showed weather that made you glad to be inside, which was, Harry had come to suspect, part of the original architectural intent. He was in the library on a Tuesday morning before breakfast, which was where he'd been most Tuesday mornings for the past 6 weeks, sitting across from Hermione with a handwritten Asgardian grammar guide between them and a candle that kept guttering in the draught from the window. Hermione's Asgardian was coming along in the way that everything Hermione did came along, with terrifying speed and aggressive precision, and occasional moments where she'd suddenly look up from the page and say something like, but the verb placement implies a fundamentally different relationship to time than English grammar does, and Harry would have to stop and think about whether she was right, which she usually was. This phrase, she said now, pushing the page toward him and tapping a line she'd been working on for 20 minutes. The 3rd clause. You translated it as, the magic agrees, but that's not quite right, is it? It's more like, the magic consents. Harry looked at the clause. Then at her. Yes, he said. Which means Asgardian Seer theory treats magic as a participant rather than a tool, she said, which is a completely different foundational assumption than wand magic, which treats the caster as the agent and the magic as the medium. She looked like someone who had just opened a door and found a much larger room behind it. That changes everything about the methodology. Yes, Harry said again. She sat back. Why don't they teach this here? Because they don't know it, Harry said. The 2 traditions have been separate for a very long time. Long enough that most wizarding scholars don't know Asgardian Seer is a full magical tradition rather than just mythology. That's a significant gap. Enormous, Harry agreed. She looked at the page again. When you do wandless magic, you're not overriding the wand magic framework. You're using a different framework entirely. Yes. The wand is a focusing tool in one tradition. In Seer, intention is the focus and the magic itself is the partner. He paused. They're compatible. Better together than separate, actually, once you understand both. The wand channels and directs what Seer initiates. Hermione was quiet for a moment, doing the internal processing that happened behind her eyes like weather. Then, can I try something? She picked up her wand. Held it loosely, the way Harry had shown her, not gripping, letting it orient, and looked at the candle between them. She wasn't performing a spell. She was, Harry could see, trying to feel the ambient field rather than impose on it, the new framework layered over the old one. The candle flame steadied. Then rose, an inch higher than it should have been without wind, clean and still. Hermione stared at it. That's, she started. Yes, Harry said. I didn't cast anything. No. You shifted your relationship to the ambient field and the field responded. He watched her. You're a fast learner. I'm a motivated learner, she said, and looked at the candle with something close to wonder, which was not an expression that crossed Hermione Granger's face often. She was usually ahead of wonder, past it into analysis. This was the moment before the analysis. Harry, this could change every application of wand magic we know. If you integrated the two methodologies, I know. Have you told Dumbledore? Not yet. Flitwick would lose his mind. Probably. She looked at him. Why haven't you said anything? This is extraordinary. Harry was quiet for a moment. Because information shared is information you no longer control, he said. Not forever. But I want to understand it better before anyone else starts shaping the conversation around it. Hermione looked at him steadily. You don't fully trust Dumbledore yet. I trust him to do what he believes is right, Harry said. I'm less certain our definitions of right align completely. She was quiet for a moment. He put something very dangerous under a school full of children, she said carefully. Yes. And told no one except the staff. Yes. And expected students to simply not notice. That was his first miscalculation, Harry agreed. Hermione looked at the candle, which was still burning slightly high. She seemed to reach a decision. What's under the corridor? She asked. I know you know. I know something is there, Harry said. I know it's powerful and contained and whatever Voldemort, he used the name without pause, no flinching, and noticed Hermione brace slightly at it, is moving toward involves wanting it. How do you know he's moving toward anything? Harry's hand moved, involuntarily, to the scar on his forehead. Not touching it. Just near it. The scar, he said. It's not just a scar. Whatever connected me to him the night my parents died didn't entirely disconnect. I can feel when he's in motion. Not clearly. Like hearing a sound through a wall. Hermione stared at him. That's extraordinary and concerning, yes, Harry said. I know. Have you told anyone? Dumbledore knows something is there. He doesn't know how aware I am of it. He paused. I'm planning a conversation about it. When I know more. What more do you need to know? I need to know what's actually down there, Harry said. Not to interfere. To understand what we're dealing with. Hermione looked at him for a long, steady moment. She said. You're already involved, Harry said. You noticed the candle flame, you've been learning seer theory for 6 weeks, and you're going to figure out the rest of it in approximately 3 days regardless of what I tell you. So yes. She sat with that. Then, I'll check out everything written about significant magical artifacts hidden in Britain in the last 20 years, she said, in a tone that meant she had already mentally mapped the relevant shelf section. Meet me here Thursday. Thursday, Harry agreed. Ron was dealing with a different kind of problem. Specifically, he was dealing with the problem of Percy, who had come to Ron the previous night with more information about the strangers in Hogsmeade and a face full of conflict between his duties as a prefect and his loyalty to his family's curiosity about what Harry Potter was actually like. Harry found this out at breakfast when Ron dropped onto the bench beside him, pushed a bowl of porridge aside, and said, Percy's been watching. Watching what? Harry asked. The strangers. Two of them came back. Ron's voice was low, underneath the breakfast noise. Yesterday. Different in this time. And Percy says one of them, the thin one, he saw him near the school boundary. Just standing there. Looking at the castle. Harry set down his fork. He thought about the cold effect Percy had described. Temperature dropping. He ran through what he knew of magical entities that produced that, and there were several, none of them straightforwardly dangerous but all of them worth knowing about. Then he thought about the old coins. Old coins in Britain, non-wizarding, non-muggle. Something clicked. Ron, he said. The coins Percy described, did he say what they looked like? Shape, size, markings. Ron frowned. He said, silver, I think. And the edges were odd. Not milled. Hammered. Hammered silver coins. Pre-decimal British coins were milled. Before that they were hammered. Medieval, or earlier. Not a contemporary faction. Not one of Voldemort's organized followers, who used standard wizarding currency because they operated within wizarding society. Someone older. Someone working a longer game. I need to talk to Percy, Harry said. I'll get him, Ron said immediately, which was the thing about Ron, he didn't ask 12 questions first, he just moved, which was more useful than people gave him credit for. Percy Weasley was tall, prefect-badged, and uncomfortable in a way that manifested as excessive precision. He told Harry everything he'd observed with the thoroughness of someone who had been building a file on it, including details Harry suspected Percy had noted more out of habit than strategic thinking, but which turned out to matter. The third stranger, not the cold one, not one of the two regulars, had been seen only once, at the edge of the village, and had done something Percy described as looking at his hands, a small motion that Percy had noticed because the light around the man's hands had been briefly wrong. Wrong how? Harry asked. Like light going in instead of coming out, Percy said, uncertain whether this made sense. It did. It meant the man was reading magical currents. Actively scanning the ambient field, pulling information from it. That was not standard wizarding practice. That was something much closer to the Asgardian technique of feeling the field rather than casting into it. Someone out there was reading the ambient field, tracking Harry specifically, and paying in medieval silver coins. Harry pulled out a piece of parchment and wrote 3 things: old magic. Old money. Field readers. He stared at it. Then he went to find the one section of the Hogwarts library he hadn't fully explored yet. The restricted section wasn't possible without a signed form, but there was a collection of pre-Hogwarts magical history texts that most students ignored because they predated the current curriculum and were considered historical rather than practical. He'd been meaning to go through them properly. He went through them now, fast, with the reading speed Odin had developed in him, not skimming, but processing, the way you process information when you've been trained to read primary texts for essential content. 3 hours later he found it, in a document written in 1203 CE that described, in precise if archaic English, a group of practitioners who had existed in Britain long before the founding of Hogwarts. He read it twice. Then sat very still for a moment. Then went to get Hermione, because this was exactly the kind of thing that required a second brain operating at full capacity. The Rune Seers, Hermione said, reading over his shoulder, having arrived at the library with her satchel in 4 minutes flat. A pre-Hogwarts order of magical practitioners who maintained the old British sites. Stonehenge, Avebury, the chalk figures. She paused. They were suppressed when Hogwarts was founded. The founders wanted a unified magical tradition, and these people weren't wand users at all. They read ambient fields. They worked the old sites. And apparently some of them are still working, Harry said. But why would they be watching you? Harry thought about this. The scar, he said. And what it means about my magical signature. I carry 2 traditions simultaneously, the wizarding one I was born into, and the Asgardian seer I was raised on. If someone is sensitive to ambient field reading, you'd be unmissable, Hermione said. Like a lighthouse. She straightened up. They're not enemies. Not necessarily, Harry said. But someone sent them. They don't have an obvious organizational structure from what I can find. They're isolated groups, working different sites. Someone coordinated 3 of them to come to Hogsmeade. Dumbledore, Hermione said immediately. Or someone who knew I was coming here before I arrived, Harry said. And wanted to understand what I am before making contact. How do you want to handle it? Harry thought about what Odin had taught him about negotiation, which was essentially the same thing Odin had taught him about everything: understand what the other party actually wants, because what they say they want and what they want are usually different things, and the gap between those two things is where every conflict lives. I'm going to make it easy for them, Harry said. I'll go to the boundary. Hermione stared. You're going to walk up to 3 unknown magic practitioners who have been watching the school, on your own. I'll tell Ron and McGonagall where I'm going, Harry said. That's not the part one was worried about. I know what I'm doing, Harry said. And whoever sent them knows that. That's why they haven't come further. He stood up, rolling the old document and tucking it away. If they wanted trouble, they'd have come inside the wards already. They can't, actually. The Hogwarts wards would repel anyone with hostile intent. The fact that they've been at the boundary but not through it means they're being careful. That's the beginning of a conversation. Hermione looked at him with the expression she got when she disagreed with something but couldn't find the logical counterargument. Fine, she said. But I'm telling Ron. I was going to tell Ron myself. I'll tell him faster. He went on a Thursday afternoon with a free period, crossing the grounds in the November cold with his hands in his pockets and his wand loose against his forearm in the sleeve holster he'd had an Asgardian artificer make him over the summer. The castle at his back hummed with all its layered magic. The lake was flat and pewter-colored. The boundary of the wards was visible to him as a faint shimmer about 50 meters past the groundskeeper's hut, not visible to most people, but he'd been reading wards since he was 9. He stood at the boundary and waited. It took about 4 minutes. The thin man came out of the tree line to his left, tall and angular, pale, moving with the careful deliberateness of someone very old who had learned to be economical. He stopped about 10 meters away, on the outside of the wards. He was old. Very old. Not Asgardian old, but human old, the kind of old that exists in people who have lived extraordinarily carefully for a very long time. His eyes were the color of river water and they were reading Harry the way Harry had learned to read magical fields, feeling the shape of things, the texture. You're young, the man said, in a voice like old timber. 11, Harry agreed. Who sent you? No one sent us, the man said. We came. You coordinated across 3 separate groups to appear in the same village within 2 days of each other, Harry said. Someone organized that. A pause. The man's expression shifted slightly, not caught out, but respecting the accuracy. We were informed, he said carefully, that you were coming to Britain. That you were, particular. By who? The man was quiet. The old sites, Harry said. Stonehenge. Avebury. The field lines that run between them. You feel when something moves through them, don't you? Something significant. You moved through them, the man said. When you arrived. Like a stone dropped in still water. The ripples went everywhere. Harry thought about the night he'd crossed into Britain from the Bifrost, the transit point Thor had used, the way the ambient field had lit up around the arrival point. He'd felt it himself and noted it and moved on. He hadn't considered who else might have felt it. My magical signature, Harry said. The Asgardian seer combined with the wizarding core. You've never felt that before. Not in living memory, the man said. Not in any of our records. He looked at Harry steadily. The last person to carry both was, he paused, seeming to reconsider how much he was saying. Who? Harry asked. Someone who existed before the founding of Hogwarts, the man said carefully. Before the formal separation of traditions. In the time when the boundaries were more permeable. Harry held very still inside. Because this connected to something Odin had said, something that had sat at the back of his mind since he was 7 and had not yet found the right context. There are things this tradition understands about magic that we do not understand here. You're going to want to see the All-Father, the man said. Harry blinked. It was the first time anything had actually surprised him in this conversation. You know Odin. We know of him, the man said. We know of the connection he maintains with the old sites. The ley lines of Britain are, he seemed to search for the right language, they connect to the world tree. Everything connects to the world tree. The intersection of those connections is a specific type of magical conduit. That conduit has been absent from Britain for a very long time. He looked at Harry. Until you. Harry thought about this. About what it meant if the ley lines of Britain and the roots of Yggdrasil intersected. About what it meant that he was, apparently, some kind of living intersection point. About what it meant that Odin had known this and had described Harry as a bridge. What do you want from me? Harry asked. Nothing, the man said. We wanted to see. To confirm what we felt. A pause. And to tell you that the old sites are aware, now. Of your presence. They will respond to you if you learn to ask. The way I can read ambient fields, Harry said slowly. The way you already do, the man said. But the sites are not ambient field. They are, he searched again, older. Deeper. They remember things the surface magic has forgotten. He turned to go, with the unhurried authority of someone who has delivered what they came to deliver. Wait, Harry said. The cold. The temperature drop. That was you? The man turned back. An old technique, he said. For reading field density in areas of high magical concentration. It requires, he stopped. Looked at Harry more carefully. You already know what it requires. Yes, Harry said. I've done similar work. Different method, same principle. The old man looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, come to Stonehenge in the summer. It wasn't a request. Not quite an invitation. Something between the two. Bring the question you haven't asked yet. Which question is that? Harry said. The one about your mother, the man said, and walked back into the trees, and was gone. Harry stood at the ward boundary in the November cold for a full 30 seconds. Then he turned and walked back to the castle, quickly, because he had a great many things to think about and he thought better when he was moving. Loki came on a Friday. He arrived the way Loki arrived anywhere, without announcement, without a portal, simply present in a location he hadn't been in a moment before, sitting in the Gryffindor common room armchair nearest the fire when Harry came down from the dormitory at 6 in the morning. Harry stopped on the stairs. Loki looked up from the book he was reading. It was one of Hermione's, Harry noticed, which was either flattery or theft depending on how you looked at it, and said, the password is Caput Draconis. Security here is embarrassing. How did you get through the wards? Harry asked. I went around them, Loki said pleasantly. The Hogwarts wards have been built for 1,000 years by multiple headmasters. Yes, Loki said. They're very impressive. For a 1,000-year-old fixed structure with 17 exploitable seams in the northeastern quadrant. He closed the book. You look well. Harry came down the rest of the stairs. You could have written. Letters are for people with patience. Loki looked around the common room, the squashy chairs, the fireplace, the Gryffindor banner, the general atmosphere of comfortable chaos, with the expression of someone cataloging an anthropological specimen. This is very small. You say that about most places. Loki's mouth quirked. Your brother says that. I say it about places that are genuinely small. He looked back at Harry. Your father is concerned. Which father? The one with the eye patch and the ravens and the unreasonable quantity of wisdom, Loki said. He has been watching the ley line activity around Britain and has some opinions about what it means. The rune seers came, Harry said. I spoke to one of them. Loki went still in the particular way Loki went still when something was more significant than he wanted to show. And? Harry told him. Everything, the conversation at the boundary, the old man's description of the ley lines connecting to Yggdrasil, the comment about someone who had carried both magical traditions before the founding of Hogwarts, and the last sentence about his mother. Loki listened without interrupting, which was rare enough to be notable. When Harry finished, Loki stood up from the armchair and walked to the window, hands clasped behind his back, looking out at the dark November grounds. He was quiet for a long moment. What do you know about the origin of wizarding magic? Loki asked. It's an indigenous Midgardian tradition, Harry said. Pre-Roman. Connected to the natural magic of the environment. Partially correct, Loki said. The tradition is Midgardian. The origin of the core that powers it, he turned, is not. Harry waited. During the First Dark Age, Loki said, which was the Asgardian term for a period roughly 10,000 years before recorded human history, Odin made alliances with several Midgardian peoples. Part of those alliances involved seeding. Introducing strands of Asgardian seer into bloodlines that were already magically sensitive. He paused. The Midgardian magical tradition isn't entirely separate from Asgardian seer. It's a branch of it. Evolved separately for thousands of years, diverged significantly, but the same root. Harry was very quiet. Your mother, Loki said, was a descendant of one of those original bloodlines. The Evans line. Old name. Old family, if you know where to look. He looked at Harry steadily. This is what Odin recognized when Thor brought you home. It's why you carry both. Not because of coincidence. Because you were always going to. Harry thought about this for a long moment. Not the personal dimension, that was for later, when he was alone, but the strategic implications. Voldemort, he said. Does this, the connection between traditions. Does it change what the scar means? What the connection means? Yes, Loki said simply. How? Because the spell he used to try to kill you, the killing curse, it operates on a fundamental assumption that the target's magical core can be overloaded and severed. It works on every Midgardian wizard who has encountered it. He paused. You have a mixed core. Seer and wand magic, integrated at the deepest level. Overloading one triggered a feedback through the other. Instead of severing, it doubled back. The curse reflected. I know that part, Harry said. What you don't know, Loki said, is that the reflected curse did not simply deflect. It anchored. A part of his magical essence, the part that was in the curse at the moment of reflection, attached to your scar. You are not merely connected to Voldemort, Harry. He met Harry's eyes with unusual directness. You contain a fragment of him. The fire crackled. The common room was very quiet. That's, Harry said, significant. Enormously, Loki said. Does Dumbledore know? Dumbledore suspects something is wrong with the connection, Loki said. He does not know the specifics. The Midgardian magical tradition has no framework for understanding this. They have no concept of split essences, no understanding of what happens when a killing curse reflects off a mixed core. He paused. Odin knows. How long has he known? Since he examined you the first week, Loki said. He has been deciding how to tell you. Harry thought about that. About Odin sitting with this information for 7 years, carrying it, deciding when and how. He could have told me earlier, Harry said, not angry. Just noting it. He could have told a 7-year-old that he contained a piece of the dark wizard who murdered his parents, Loki said. He chose to wait until you were old enough to understand the strategic dimensions rather than only the emotional ones. That's both very Odin and very reasonable, Harry said after a moment. Yes. Loki looked at him. How are you? The question, from Loki, was unusual enough that Harry took a moment to answer it honestly. Processing, he said. I'll be fine. I know you'll be fine, Loki said. That's not what I asked. Harry looked at the fire. He's in here, he said. A piece of him. And I've been feeling him move for 2 months and I didn't know why it was so clear. He paused. It's strange to know that. Yes, Loki said. Does it change what I am? You already contained him, Loki said. Knowing it doesn't change the fact. He paused. What it changes is what you can do with it. Harry looked at him. What can I do with it? Loki's expression shifted into something complicated, the look that meant he was weighing how much to give. The fragment is passive, he said. Right now. Dormant, because Voldemort himself is dormant. If he becomes active, the fragment wakes, Harry said. Yes. And the connection becomes bidirectional. He will be able to find you anywhere. A pause. But you will also be able to find him. And more than find him, Harry said slowly. If I'm carrying part of his essence, if I understand the structure of his magic from the inside, you understand his vulnerabilities, Loki said. His limits. What the fragment shows you about how he built himself is a map of exactly where the architecture is weak. Harry was quiet for a moment. You've been sitting on this since the beginning of term, he said to Loki. You arrived exactly when I found the runeseers. When I started actively investigating. I arrived, Loki said, when Odin decided you were ready to know and wanted someone other than himself to tell you. Because he's worried about how I'll react to him having kept it. Yes. Harry thought about Odin. About 7 years of careful, patient teaching, and this thing sitting underneath it, and the reason it sat underneath it, which was love expressed as caution, the Odin way of doing everything. He felt something complicated in his chest about it and set it aside for when he was alone. Tell him, Harry said, that I understand. And that I want to talk to him. I'll tell him, Loki said. He moved toward the door of the common room. Loki, Harry said. Yes. The fragment in my scar. If I learn to read it, not just feel when Voldemort's moving, but actively engage with it. Could I communicate through it? Send something through the connection rather than just receive? Loki turned. The look on his face was the look that meant he was genuinely surprised, which was an unusual face on Loki and therefore worth paying attention to. That is, he said slowly, either the most dangerous idea you have ever had or the most brilliant one. Or both, Harry said. Or both, Loki agreed. He held Harry's gaze for a moment. Yes. Theoretically. It would require understanding the fragment structure at a level that would take time. I have time, Harry said. He's not ready yet. I can feel that. Then perhaps, Loki said, you use the time accordingly. He moved toward the door again. I'll let myself out. A different way than I came in, so as not to tip off the headmaster. He already knows you're here, Harry said. Loki paused. Does he? He was in the corridor outside the portrait hole for about 10 minutes before going back to his office, Harry said. He chose not to come in. Loki looked at the portrait hole. Then back at Harry. He let me in. He let you have the conversation he didn't want to have himself, Harry said. He's complicated. He is, Loki said. I respect that. He disappeared in the way Loki disappeared, not dramatically, just quietly gone, like a thought you lose between one moment and the next. The Quidditch match against Slytherin was a disaster for Slytherin and a somewhat unexpected experience for Harry. He found the snitch in 4 minutes. He hadn't been trying to end the game that fast, 4 minutes was barely enough time for the match to develop any shape, but the snitch had the audacity to hover directly in his eye line about 30 seconds into the game and he simply went after it, because ignoring a visible snitch was not an option that his competitive instincts recognized as valid. The thing about chasing was that it was the same as reading a field. You tracked multiple data streams simultaneously: wind, position, speed, the other seeker's line of movement, and calculated intersections. He'd been doing that kind of tracking since he was 8. The snitch was fast, and it was clever in the way that enchanted objects were clever, but it was working within the parameters of its enchantment, and Harry could read those parameters in about 30 seconds of direct observation. He came out of a steep dive with it clutched in his right hand, the crowd making a noise like an avalanche, and landed on the pitch and looked at the snitch in his palm and felt, not triumphant, exactly. More like satisfied. The way you're satisfied when something goes exactly as it should. Wood was sprinting across the pitch making sounds that weren't words. The Slytherin seeker, a tall third-year named Flint, was standing on his broom looking at Harry with an expression that moved between disbelief and resentment. 4 minutes, Flint said. 3 minutes and 47 seconds, Harry said. The match was 4 minutes old. Yes. Harry looked up at him. Sorry, did you want it to take longer? Flint went the color of a radish and flew back to the Slytherin stands without another word. In the stands, Hermione was saying something to Ron that he couldn't hear, but the gestures suggested were analytical. Ron was grinning and pumping his fist. And in the teacher's stands, he clocked, Snape was watching him with an expression that had moved somewhere past the flat assessment and into something more specific. Something that looked, oddly, like the same quality of attention he gave to the potions sample he'd kept separately. Studying. Not hostile. Studying. Harry filed that away. He tried the connection on a Thursday night in December, the first real attempt at engaging with the fragment in the scar rather than just passively receiving from it. He was alone in the dormitory, everyone else downstairs, the curtains drawn around his bed, a single low-burning lamp. He sat cross-legged with his wand in his lap and his eyes open and extended his seer inward rather than outward, which was technically one of the most advanced things Loki had ever taught him and had taken him 2 weeks of private practice to get reliable. The scar was warm. It was always slightly warm in a way that normal scars weren't, the warmth of something still active, still alive. He followed that warmth the way you follow a thread, carefully, without pulling, just tracing its direction. Down through the surface layers. Through the standard magical core. Deeper than that, to where the two traditions existed side by side, seer and wand magic, integrated and distinct simultaneously. And there, beneath both, threaded through both like a root through soil, the fragment. He'd felt it before as a general presence. This close, examining its actual structure, it was different. It was small. And wounded. And very, very old in the way that things are old when they've been cut off from their source and preserved in an environment they weren't designed for. Not dangerous, right now. Hibernating. Harry sat with it carefully, the way you sit with something injured, without imposing. Just, present. He extended a very thin thread of seer toward it, not touching, just letting his magical signature register near it, letting the fragment feel that Harry knew it was there. There was a pause. Then the fragment, this tiny, lost piece of something vast, stirred. Not toward Harry. Away. A reflexive retreat, the instinct of something that had been hidden long enough that exposure was alarming. Harry let it go. Didn't chase. Just left the thread of seer there, not asking, not taking, just existing near it. He stayed there for 20 minutes. He'd go again tomorrow night. And the night after. Patience, Odin had taught him, was not inaction. Patience was consistent, intentional presence over time. You waited not because you were passive but because the right moment was worth building toward. He opened his eyes and the dormitory materialized around him, and he realized that while he'd been working, it had started snowing outside the window, the first snow of December, quiet and purposeful, settling on the castle grounds like a decision. He watched it for a while before sleeping. Dumbledore found him in the corridor near the library 2 days later. Actually found him this time, not a manufactured encounter. Dumbledore had been moving with purpose, robes sweeping, and stopped when he saw Harry. "A word, if you have a moment," Dumbledore said. They walked into an unused classroom. Dumbledore closed the door without touching it. "The people at Hogsmeade Boundary," Dumbledore said. "You went to speak with them?" "Yes. Professor McGonagall told me." "I told McGonagall I was going," Harry said. "I wasn't hiding it." "No," Dumbledore said. "I know." He looked at Harry. "What did they tell you?" Harry considered how much to give. He thought about what Loki had said about information and control. He thought about Dumbledore standing in the corridor letting Loki in without intervening. He thought about the things he knew that Dumbledore didn't know he knew, and the things Dumbledore knew that Harry didn't know he knew, and how information shared between them could move things forward. He decided on partial honesty, which was the Asgardian diplomatic standard. "That the ley lines of Britain connect to Yggdrasil," Harry said. "That I'm detectable across those lines because of my mixed magical signature. And that there's a history between the wizarding tradition and the Asgardian one that isn't in any current text." Dumbledore was very still. "That is more than I knew," he said quietly. "I thought it might be," Harry said. "There's more. But I'm still piecing it together. When I have a fuller picture I'll share it with you." "You are being very generous with a great deal of information," Dumbledore said. "I'm being strategic with a measured amount," Harry said. "There's a difference. I'm also expecting reciprocity." Dumbledore looked at him with those sharp, careful eyes. "What would you like to know?" "The thing in the corridor," Harry said. "Tell me what it is. Not where it is or how it's guarded. What it is. If it's what I think it is, then we both already know why Voldemort wants it, and understanding the object helps me understand what shape his approach will take." A long pause. "It is called the Philosopher's Stone," Dumbledore said. "It produces the elixir of life. Indefinitely. It also transmutes base metal to gold, though that is the lesser application." He paused. "It belongs to a man named Nicholas Flamel, who is currently very old. Without the stone, he and his wife will die. And Voldemort wants it for the elixir," Harry said. "He has no body," Dumbledore said. "Not truly. He exists in a parasitic state. The elixir would allow him to sustain and potentially reconstitute a form long enough to find another method of permanence." Harry thought about the fragment in his scar. About what it had told him, passively, about Voldemort's condition, the sense of something spread thin, stretched between multiple anchor points, none of them stable. A spirit trying to persist without a vessel. "He has multiple anchors," Harry said. "He's not entirely in one place. That's why he survived the initial defeat. He fragmented himself intentionally." Dumbledore went completely still. Harry held his gaze. "I can feel him, Professor. Through the scar. Not everything, but the shape of things. I know he's not entire. I know he's looking for something to stabilize around, and the stone is one option among several he's considering." "Several," Dumbledore said softly. "Yes." The silence lasted a long time. "Harry," Dumbledore said, and his voice had shifted into something that Harry recognized as the genuine register, stripped of performance. "How much of this have you been carrying alone?" "I haven't been alone," Harry said. "I have people." He paused. "But I'm going to need to be the one who handles the situation below the school. When it happens. You know that." "I know no such thing," Dumbledore said carefully. "The protections below are designed to allow someone through who has courage, intelligence, and specific magical capability," Harry said. "Not the headmaster's magical capability, a younger person. A student-level capability plus something extra. That's by design, isn't it?" "It wasn't a question. You built it to allow me through." The silence that followed was the longest one yet. "I built it," Dumbledore said carefully, "to allow certain qualities through. I did not know, when I designed it, what specific student would possess those qualities. But you hoped I would, Harry said. Dumbledore said nothing for a moment. Then, yes. Thank you for the honesty, Harry said. I'll go when it's time. And I'll be fine. He stood. The fragment in the scar, I'm learning to read it. I'll know before you do when Voldemort makes his move. He walked to the door. At the door he paused, which was becoming a habit, because door pauses seemed to produce the best final word moments. Professor, he said. When this is over, I want to talk to you about what I learned from the rune seers and what it means for magical theory. The divide between traditions is artificial and the reconciliation of them is possible. That's worth more than any stone. He left. Behind him in the empty classroom, Dumbledore sat very still for a long time, looking at the door Harry had walked through, and his expression was something that people who knew Albus Dumbledore well would have found remarkable. He looked, quite specifically, like a man who had planned for many things and had not planned for this. Chapter 5, War in the Corridors. The fragment woke on a Tuesday in June. Harry felt it at 3 a.m, not gradually, not with any warning preamble, just a sudden, complete alertness that pulled him out of sleep the way cold water pulls you out of a dream. He sat up in the dark dormitory and put his hand to the scar and felt it burning, not painfully but urgently, like a compass needle swinging hard to north. Voldemort was moving. Not toward him. Toward the stone. He was out of bed and dressed in 60 seconds, which was a skill developed over years of Asgardian training schedules that started before dawn. He took his wand from the bedside holster and rolled his sleeves and stood in the quiet dormitory for exactly 3 seconds, listening to the breathing of 4 boys who were entirely uninvolved in what was about to happen, and decided something. He went and knocked on Ron's curtain. Ron, he said quietly. A snore. Then shuffling. Then, Wah, I need you to do something. Ron's head appeared, hair catastrophic, eyes mostly closed. Now. Now. Harry pulled the communication stone from under his pillow, he'd started keeping it there in October, and pressed it into Ron's hand. If I'm not back by morning, hold this and say Mjolnir. Clearly. Just that word. Ron looked at the stone. He was waking up fast. Ron woke up fast when things were actually happening, Harry had noticed, the Weasley pragmatism kicking in over the sleepiness. Harry, what, it calls Thor, Harry said. Don't use it unless I'm not back by morning. Tell Hermione what's happening when she wakes up. What is happening? What we've been expecting, Harry said, and moved. He went to Hermione's dormitory door, different staircase, girls' side. He stood at the bottom and sent a small, precise seer pulse up the stairs calibrated specifically to her magical signature, a technique he'd developed over the term for exactly this kind of situation. A quick triple tap of warmth against her magical core that would register as a signal rather than an intrusion. Within 90 seconds she appeared at the top of the stairs, robe over her pajamas, hair disordered, already holding her wand. He looked up at her. She looked down at him. Now, she said. Yes. She came down. No further discussion required. The third-floor corridor was empty, which was expected. The locked door at the end of it was unlocked, which was not, the protections had been breached from the inside, the door hanging at a slight angle, the locking charm shattered and left behind like a broken lock on a kicked door. Someone had come through this way earlier tonight. Harry crouched and looked at the shattered charm. The magical residue was thin and stretched, the signature of something that wasn't operating at full strength, that had broken the lock through sheer persistence rather than elegant technique. Whatever Voldemort was working through, it wasn't at full power. He moved through the door and Hermione came through behind him. The dog, Fluffy, Hagrid called it, 3 heads, enormous, a creature that had absolutely no business being in a school, was asleep, all 3 heads, snoring with a rhythm that made the floor vibrate. A small harp was playing by itself in the corner, a simple looping melody that was maintaining the sleep. Harry stepped carefully over the enormous legs and lifted the trapdoor in the floor. That was easier than I expected, Hermione murmured. Voldemort already came through, Harry said. He cleared the path. He cleared it for himself, Hermione said. We're following someone who's already solved the puzzle. Yes. Harry looked down into the dark below the trapdoor. Which means we know the traps he encountered. We just need to be faster through them than he was. He dropped through. The devil's snare was already pulled back, it had constricted around something and then released it, the plant's coils retracted to the walls, evidently satisfied with having made someone's journey unpleasant before being overcome. Harry landed on the floor of the chamber and stood clear while Hermione came through, and they moved immediately to the next door. The flying keys room was a disaster of feathers and broken wings, most of the keys knocked out of the air and scattered on the ground, a few still circling in confused patterns near the ceiling. The broom was still hovering where someone had left it, which was convenient. Harry took it, went up, and in 45 seconds had the right key, not the one most obviously battered and old, but the one that the magical resonance of the lock was pulling toward, the one the lock was asking for, which was different from the one that looked most likely. He brought it down. Hermione had been watching his process with her wand out and the systematic focus of someone cross-referencing observations with theory. You found it by feeling the lock's preference, she said. Yes. Not by looking for the battered one. The battered one was a decoy, Harry said. The charm on the lock calls to the right key. You just have to listen to it rather than look. That should have taken anyone without seer training 20 minutes, Hermione said. I know. He came through here struggling, she said. There are feathers everywhere and 3 wrong keys on the floor by the door. He fought through it. He's not operating at full capacity, Harry said. Whatever vessel he's using is limited. Let's move. The chess room was the third surprise. The board was in mid-game, a violent mid-game, the kind that happened when someone had played fast and brutal and didn't care about elegance, forcing their way through rather than navigating. Several white pieces were destroyed and several black ones too, and the route to the far door was clear, but the remaining pieces had reset to their starting positions and were watching the door with the specific attention of things waiting to resume. Hermione looked at the board. At the pieces. At Harry. I can play through it, she said. Quickly. If we sacrifice, how long? Harry asked. 10 minutes. Maybe 15. Harry thought about the fragment in his scar, which was burning steadily and had been burning steadily since he'd woken up. Voldemort was already at the stone, or close to it. 15 minutes mattered. He stepped onto the board. The pieces moved, immediately and aggressively, rook sliding, a bishop swinging its base toward him. Harry held up his left hand, palm out, and let Seer push outward from it in a steady, flat wave, not violent, not destructive, just present, a field of magical pressure that pushed against the animation enchantment on every piece simultaneously. The pieces stopped. Every single one, mid-motion, as if someone had pressed pause. Hermione made a small, involuntary sound. Harry walked across the board at a normal pace, the pieces trembling around him against the pressure of his seer, unable to move but straining against it. At the far door he turned and held the pressure until Hermione had crossed. Then he released it, and the chess pieces crashed back into motion behind them, furious, and the door closed. You just, Hermione started. Suspended the animation enchantment, Harry said. It's a brute force approach. Inelegant. Inelegant, she repeated, in the tone of someone for whom this word does not adequately cover the situation. The elegant version would take longer. Right, she said. Yes. Moving. The troll room smelled like something that had been violently unconscious for a while. The troll in question was already down, sprawled across most of the available floor space, with what looked like a severe headache in its future and what appeared to be the impact point of a fairly direct magical strike on its left temple. They stepped over it without discussing it. The potion room was Snape's, and it was the one that stopped them. 7 bottles on a table, a wall of purple fire behind, a wall of black fire ahead. A folded piece of parchment. Hermione grabbed the parchment and read it, her lips moving slightly, eyes moving fast. Logic puzzle, she said. 7 bottles. 3 are poison, 2 are nettle wine, 1 gets you through the black fire, 1 gets you back through the purple. She was already analyzing, finger moving down the written clues. I can solve this. Harry was already looking at the bottles. Not at their labels or sizes, those were the puzzle parameters. He was reading their magical residue, the trail of what had been touched and handled and most recently uncorked. One of the 7 had a faint trace of something that had passed through it, not poison, something else, something thin and cold and purposeful. 3rd from the left, Harry said. Hermione looked up. I haven't finished, 3rd from the left, Harry said. It's been used. In the last 2 hours. Whatever is going through this school tonight uncorked that bottle and went through the black fire. He picked it up and showed her the inside of the stopper. Residue. Thin and cold. Parasitic magical signature. She looked. Then looked at him. That's the going forward bottle. Yes. You identified it in about 30 seconds. The puzzle is an intellectual filter, Harry said. It assumes the person solving it can only work within the puzzle's parameters. He handed it to her. The answer for the way back is this one, 4th from the right. Clean, untouched, the only one besides the 3rd that has the right magical weight for a purpose bottle rather than a poison. He paused. You should go back. She looked at him. Hermione, he said. Harry. You've been brilliant through every room, he said. You got me here faster than I would have gotten here alone. What's through that fire is not a puzzle or a chess game or a plant or a locked door. It's Voldemort. I know that. I need you to go back, Harry said. Not because you're not capable. Because I need someone who isn't in that room to know what happened. And because what I'm going to do in there is going to be, he searched for the word, significant. And there shouldn't be anyone nearby who isn't prepared for significant. She looked at him for a long, steady moment. Her jaw was set and her eyes were bright and she was afraid, he could see it, the managed fear of someone who had decided to be brave, and she was also, he could see, hearing the logic of what he was saying. If you're not out in 20 minutes, she said, I'm sending Ron to use the stone. Agreed. Be careful, she said, and it came out with enough feeling that she immediately followed it with, which is obvious and unnecessary advice but I'm saying it anyway. I know, Harry said. Thank you for coming this far. She took the 4th from the right bottle, and walked into the purple fire, and was gone. Harry looked at the bottle in his hand for a moment. Then he uncorked it and drank it, it tasted like ice and metal, and stepped through the black fire. The chamber on the other side was enormous and circular, lit by torches and brackets that had been burning for months, waiting. The mirror of Erist stood at the far end, tall and magnificent and terrible in the way that things are terrible when they show you something you want with more honesty than you can usually bear. And in front of the mirror, Professor Quirrell. Harry walked forward, unhurried, taking in everything. The mirror's magic, pulling at the ambient field around it. The room's wards, which were Dumbledore's most complex work, layered and specific, all focused on protecting a single object from a single type of access. Quirrell himself, standing with his back to Harry, both hands raised toward the mirror, trembling with effort. The turban. Harry had been watching Quirrell since September, because Quirrell had been watching Harry since September, the furtive attention of someone carrying a secret and checking whether the secret was visible. The man taught with a stutter and smelled of garlic and had once, in October, stood in the corridor near the 3rd floor and looked at the door with an expression that Harry had clocked and filed and revisited many times since. The turban, though, had always been the thing. The smell coming from it wasn't garlic. It was something older. More complex. And the back of Quirrell's head had a magical signature that overlapped with but did not match the front of Quirrell's head, which was anatomically impossible and therefore informative. Quirrell turned. I wondered, he said, And his voice was different, no stutter, no nervous quality, just a flat and purposeful voice that had been performing the stutter for 10 months and was glad to stop. I wondered if you'd come tonight. You've been hoping I would, Harry said. For a while. Quirrell smiled. It didn't reach anywhere near his eyes. The boy wondered. Come to face his destiny. I came, Harry said, to handle a situation before it became more complicated. He looked at the mirror. The stone is already in the mirror. You can't get it out. Quirrell's smile stayed fixed. My master has different thoughts about that. Your master, Harry said, is going to have different thoughts about several things tonight. The master wishes to speak with you, Quirrell said. I know, Harry said. I've been expecting that. This seemed to catch Quirrell off guard, the first genuine reaction, a slight falter. Harry walked forward, past Quirrell, to the mirror, and stood in front of it. The mirror showed him nothing surprising. Not gold. Not the stone. Just Harry, standing in this chamber, looking at himself, and behind his reflection, faint and warm, the faces of people who were alive and elsewhere, and that was enough, that was more than enough. He didn't need the mirror to tell him what he wanted because he already had it. He reached into the mirror. Not physically. Seer, extended into the reflective surface, reading the enchantment structure, finding the specific layer where Dumbledore had anchored the secondary protection, the one that only activated for someone who wanted to find the stone rather than use it. His hand moved and the mirror's magic recognized him, and a small weight appeared in his palm. The Philosopher's Stone. Red, roughly the size of a large walnut, warm against his skin. He looked at it. Felt the magic in it, extraordinary, layered, centuries of Nicholas Flamel's work concentrated into a single object, the kind of craftsmanship that made you appreciate craftsmanship in the abstract. He closed his fingers around it. Behind him, Quirrell made a sound. Give that to me, said a voice. Not Quirrell's voice. The voice that came from the back of Quirrell's head was nothing like Quirrell's voice. It was thin and high and cold in the way that genuinely cold things are cold, not temperature, but the specific absence of warmth that living things produce. It was the voice of something that had made itself out of the refusal to die and had been surviving on that refusal long enough that the survival had become a kind of nature. Quirrell unwound the turban. The face on the back of Quirrell's head was less like a face and more like the idea of one, red eyes, no nose, the features flattened and redrawn by whatever process had preserved this piece of Voldemort's essence in a human host. It looked at Harry with those red eyes, and the look was old and calculating and genuinely surprised in the way that something very powerful is surprised when it encounters something it didn't account for. Harry Potter, Voldemort said. At last. I know, Harry said. We've met before. You tried to kill me. I will finish what I began, Voldemort said. You won't, Harry said simply. But you know that. That's not why you want to talk. The red eyes narrowed. What do I want, then? You want to understand what I am, Harry said. You've been feeling me the same way I've been feeling you. Not clearly, you're too spread out for clear sensing. But you've felt the signature. Something you don't recognize. Something that shouldn't exist in a Midgardian wizard. He paused. You're afraid of what you don't understand. That's been the defining fact of your life. I fear nothing, Voldemort said. You fear death, Harry said. You've been afraid of it since you were a boy. Everything you've done since has been about that fear. Every piece of yourself you've split off and hidden, every atrocity, every follower you've broken, all of it to get one more day, one more year, one more extension. He kept his voice flat and even, not cruel, just precise. You split yourself into pieces because you thought that made you harder to kill. But the thing you don't understand about being in pieces is that each piece is weaker. Each piece needs more to survive. Philosophy, Voldemort said, from a child. Information, Harry said, from someone who's been reading the fragment you left in my scar for 3 months. The silence that followed was complete. The red eyes moved, not in Quirrell's head, but the eyes themselves, some deeper movement, a recalibration at a fundamental level. Harry had the clear, visceral sense of something vast and spread thin focusing all of its attention onto this single point. You felt it, Voldemort said. I mapped it, Harry said. Every structural detail of how you built it. The framework you used to split your essence. The specific points where the architecture is weakest. He tilted his head. Do you want to know what I found? You're bluffing, Voldemort said, but the voice had changed, dropped slightly, become more careful. The anchors, Harry said. You made 7. The diary was the first. There are 5 more in the world right now, and one that you haven't made yet because you lost the opportunity when you tried to kill me and the curse reflected. He watched the face on the back of Quirrell's skull. You know I'm right. You can feel me knowing it. The fragment in my scar is connected to all of them. When I reached into it, I reached into all of it. Kill him, Voldemort said to Quirrell, with an urgency that hadn't been in his voice before. Quirrell turned and raised his wand. Harry raised his left hand and pushed. Not a spell. Not exactly. The sear that came out of his palm was different from anything he'd used in the rooms above. It was the deep current, the fundamental layer, the magic that had been built over 7 years on Asgard, trained by Frigga and Loki and Odin himself, the kind of power that didn't care about the formal categories of spells and counters and magical theory. It was raw and ancient and it came from the same root as Quirrell's dark magic and was several generations more powerful. It hit Quirrell in the chest and went through the dark enchantments anchoring Voldemort's spirit to the man's body like a hand going through smoke. Quirrell flew backward across the chamber. He hit the wall. Slid down. Lay still. The spirit, the piece of Voldemort that had been riding Quirrell for a year, peeled away from the collapsed body, thin and red-tinged and furious, rising from Quirrell like heat from hot stone. It turned on Harry. You think you've won something, the voice said, now sourceless, coming from the air itself. You think this ends anything? No, Harry said. I think this ends this. The rest is a different conversation. He had the stone in his closed right fist and his left hand still raised, sear burning steady and controlled, and he looked at the thin, furious presence of Voldemort's displaced spirit with nothing that could be called fear. The fragment in my scar, Harry said. I'm going to leave it there. For now. Because it's useful. He paused. But the next time you make a move toward anything I'm responsible for, a person, a place, anyone in this school, I will find every anchor you've hidden in the world. Every single one. And I will unmake them. The spirit pulsed, with rage, with something that might have been fear, with a frustrated, clawing energy that had nowhere to go in this chamber, nothing to latch onto, no host available. It moved toward Harry. Harry didn't step back. We're done here, Harry said. He brought his hands together, stone in right, sear blazing in left, and the contact produced a sound and a light that wasn't quite either of those things, a resonance that hit every surface of the chamber and came back doubled, the specific frequency of 2 major magical traditions working in complete alignment, sear and the deep wizarding power amplified through the stone. The spirit of Voldemort screamed. Not a human sound. Not quite a sound at all, the scream of a severed thing that has just been pushed further from anything that can hold it, dispersed, scattered, the same way smoke scatters in a hard wind. And then the chamber was just a chamber. Harry stood alone in it with the stone in his hand and the torches burning and the mirror of Erist reflecting a boy standing still, holding something small, looking very steady and very tired in the way that isn't exhaustion but is instead the particular weight of having done a difficult thing. He looked at his reflection. His reflection looked back. Okay, Harry said to himself, quietly, in the enormous empty room. He went back through the black fire. Hermione was on the other side of the purple fire, in the potion room, sitting against the wall with her wand in her hand, looking up when he came through. She looked at his face. Then at the stone in his hand. Then back at his face. Are you hurt? She asked. No. Is he gone? For now, Harry said. He's not dead. He can't be killed that easily. But he's been pushed back significantly and he has no immediate method of return. He paused. And he knows that I know about the anchors. The anchors, Hermione repeated. Later, Harry said. I'll explain everything. Are you alright? I've been sitting in a potion room for 25 minutes waiting to find out if you were alive, she said. I'm several things simultaneously. Fine is approximately one of them. Harry almost smiled. Then let's go up, he said. Before Ron panics and calls Thor. Would that be bad? Last time I called Thor for help, he showed up with Mjolnir active and knocked a hole through a cliff face, Harry said. He means well. Hermione stood up, brushing her robe off. I have so many questions. I know. They'll all get answered. They walked together up through the chambers, past the potion puzzle and the unconscious troll and the scattered chess pieces and the freed keys and the retreated devil's snare and the sleeping dog, and came up through the trapdoor and through the broken door into the third-floor corridor, and walked into a corridor that had 3 people in it. Ron, in his pajamas, with the communication stone in his fist and his wand in the other hand, looking like he'd been standing there through an act of will alone. McGonagall, in her tartan robe, at sharp attention with her wand at her side, looking at them both. And Dumbledore, who was standing slightly apart from the other 2, hands folded, looking at Harry with an expression that was many things simultaneously, relief and complicated respect, and the honest weight of a man who had hoped something and had it confirmed. Well, Ron said. He exhaled. You're alive. I am, Harry said. Did you get him? Dispersed him for now. The stone is safe. Harry held it up and then looked at Dumbledore. I'll give this to you. It needs to go to Nicholas Flamel immediately and then it needs to be destroyed. Dumbledore's eyebrows rose. Destroyed. As long as it exists it's a target, Harry said. Flamel has had a good life. He and his wife will have time to prepare. He paused. That's my recommendation. It's your decision. Dumbledore looked at the stone for a long moment. Then he stepped forward and took it from Harry's palm with careful, precise hands. Professor Quirrell is in the final chamber, Harry said. He's alive. The connection to Voldemort has been severed. He'll need medical attention. Severus, Dumbledore said, without turning around. Snape stepped out of the shadow at the end of the corridor. He'd been there the whole time, Harry registered, still as furniture. Snape moved immediately toward the third-floor door without a word. Harry watched him go. Then looked back at Dumbledore. You knew he'd come tonight. I received an indication, Dumbledore said carefully. I was making my way back when events resolved themselves. You were close enough to intervene, Harry said. And you didn't. A pause. No, Dumbledore said. I didn't. Because you needed to know what I could do, Harry said. Not accusatory. Just naming the thing. Because, Dumbledore said quietly, I suspected you could do it better without me. The honesty of it was unexpected enough that Harry had to stop and process it. Then, that's the most straightforward thing you've said to me since September. I'm practicing, Dumbledore said, with a ghost of a genuine smile. You have a somewhat coercive effect on my honesty. McGonagall cleared her throat, which was her preferred method of managing conversations that had gone somewhere she wasn't prepared for. Perhaps, she said, the hospital wing. For everyone. I believe Madame Pomfrey should examine all parties, and we can conduct the debrief once it's been established that no one is suffering from magical backlash. Harry looked at his hands. His left palm was slightly red, the sear he'd pushed hadn't been gentle and it had used the deep current rather than the surface current, which always cost more. He flexed his fingers. That's sensible, he said. Right, Ron said, from somewhere behind him, sounding somewhat dazed. He was still holding the communication stone. He held it out to Harry. You should probably take this back. Harry took it. He held it for a moment, thinking about calling Thor. Then thought about the conversation that would have to happen first, the one with Odin about what Harry had done in the chamber, about the anchors and the fragment and what the rune seer had told him. He tucked it back in his pocket. Tomorrow. Tonight there was the hospital wing and Madame Pomfrey's efficient concern and Ron eating biscuit someone produced and Hermione filling 3 pages of notes while also being examined for magical contact effects, which was the most Hermione possible response to the situation. They walked down the corridor together. The hospital wing was bright and smelled like dittany and clean linen, and Madame Pomfrey descended on them all with the focused urgency of a woman who had been waiting for something to go wrong all year and was annoyed but not surprised that it had. She examined Harry's palm, made a sound that expressed professional disapproval of whatever had been done to produce this result, and applied a silver salve that was cold and smelled faintly of mint. Advanced seer discharge, Harry told her, since she was going to ask. I don't know what that is, she said. It's similar to magical backlash but from the ambient current rather than the personal core, Harry said. Cold helps. The salve is doing the right thing. She looked at him over her glasses. Are you going to diagnose yourself? Only when I can, Harry said. You can also diagnose me if you prefer. The result will be the same. She gave him the look that McGonagall had been giving him since September, the look of professional exasperation worn as a thin layer over something that was, underneath, closer to appreciation. Then she moved on to Hermione and began a separate examination. Ron appeared at Harry's bedside with a biscuit. From the tin on the desk, he said. I don't think she's meant to have them there but they're there. Thanks, Harry said, and took it. Ron sat in a chair beside the bed. For a moment he was quiet, which was unusual enough that Harry looked at him. What actually happened down there? Ron asked. The real version. Harry looked at the ceiling. Thought about how to say it. Voldemort was trying to reach the stone. I got there first. We had a conversation. Then I made him leave. Made him leave, Ron repeated. Voldemort. You made Voldemort leave. He didn't have a body. He was riding Quirrell, which is a significantly diminished state. He's still out there somewhere, he hasn't been destroyed, but he's been pushed back and he knows things have changed. Harry paused. He knows I know about his anchors. What are his anchors? Harry thought about what Dumbledore knew, what Loki had told him, what he'd read from the fragment directly. Then he thought about what Ron could carry, not in terms of intelligence, Ron was smart, but in terms of information that had strategic weight. He decided on the version that was true but abbreviated. Objects he hid pieces of himself in, Harry said. To stop himself from dying completely. He made several of them. As long as they exist, he can't be killed permanently. He paused. I need to find them. Ron chewed his biscuit. All of them. Eventually. That sounds like it's going to take a while. Years, probably. Ron looked at him for a moment. Right, he said. Okay. Okay. I mean, Ron said, obviously I'll help. That's a lot of work. You're going to need someone around who's sensible. Harry looked at him. You think you're the sensible one? Between us three? Ron said. Absolutely. Harry laughed. It was a real laugh, the kind that came from somewhere genuine, and it surprised him a little because he hadn't expected to laugh tonight, and laughter in the wake of the kind of thing that had happened in the chamber was also, he thought, deeply human and therefore worth not overanalyzing. Hermione appeared on his other side, having escaped Madame Pomfrey with a clean bill of health and her 3 pages of notes. I want to know everything, she said, sitting on the edge of the next bed. In order. Starting from when you went through the fire. Tomorrow, Harry said. Tonight, she said. Hermione, it's 4 a.m. I'm aware of the time, she said. Harry looked at her. Then at Ron. Then at the biscuit tin on Madame Pomfrey's desk, which still had biscuits in it. "Get the tin," he said. Ron got the tin. Harry talked for a long time in the quiet hospital wing, keeping his voice low, and the story of what happened in the chamber below the school was told first in that specific company, two people who had come through locked doors and chess games and devil's snare and potion puzzles because he'd needed them to, and who had waited in the dark, which was in its own way just as hard. Dumbledore came to the hospital wing the following morning. Harry was awake before he arrived. The scar was quiet, quieter than it had been since September, the fragment still present but the distant sense of movement that had been its constant background note since October was simply gone. Wherever Voldemort had dispersed to, he was resting. Rebuilding. Planning the long game. Good. Harry needed the long game. He had a great deal of work to do. Dumbledore came in, sat in the chair that Ron had vacated for breakfast, and looked at Harry for a moment. "How are you?" he asked. "Not the formal version. The genuine one." "Good," Harry said. "And meant it." "I spoke with Quirinus this morning," Dumbledore said. "He remembers very little of the past year. The possession was thorough." He paused. "He will recover, I believe. In time." Harry thought about Quirrell. About a man who had been hollowed out and used, his skills and his access and his body leveraged for someone else's agenda. A man who would wake up in a hospital bed with a year missing and a reputation in ruins. "He should be given a proper chance," Harry said. "When he's recovered. Not written off." Dumbledore looked at him. "I agree," he said, with what sounded like genuine surprise at the position. "He was a victim," Harry said. "He made a choice that led to that, but the suffering after was not equal to the choice." Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. "You have," he said carefully, "a more nuanced understanding of culpability than most 11-year-olds. I was raised by someone with one eye and two ravens," Harry said. "He has a lot of opinions about culpability." "Indeed." Dumbledore laced his fingers together. "Harry. The stone. You should destroy it," Harry said. "I stand by that." "I have spoken with Nicholas," Dumbledore said. "He and Perenelle agree. They have made their peace with it." A pause. "It was harder for them than they expected. They are very old." "It always is," Harry said. "Letting go of things that keep you alive." "Yes." Dumbledore looked at him. "I want to talk to you about what you said last night. About the anchors." "I know." 7, Dumbledore said. 7, Harry confirmed. "I know one was a diary. I know the locations of 2 others from what the fragment showed me. The remaining 4 I'll need to find through other means." He paused. "I want to work on this with you. Properly. Information shared between us rather than managed between us." Dumbledore looked at him steadily. "You're asking for a genuine partnership." "I'm asking you to stop managing me," Harry said, and kept it friendly. "I understand why you do it. Information control is the way you've operated for a very long time because it's kept people alive. But it won't work with me. I'm going to find things out whether you tell me or not, and I'd rather find them out in coordination with you than in spite of you." A long pause. "You are," Dumbledore said quietly, "the most extraordinary first-year student I have encountered in 56 years of teaching." "Second most," Harry said. "My mother sounds like she was extraordinary." Dumbledore's expression did the complicated thing it always did when Lily Potter came up, grief and guilt and love, all 3 simultaneously, the specific mixture of someone who carries the weight of decisions that can't be undone. "She was," he said. "She would be, there are no words, Harry. There are no words for what she would feel if she could see you." Harry held that for a moment. "Let it be what it was." "Okay," he said eventually. "Partnership?" Dumbledore extended his hand. "Partnership," he said. Harry shook it. He called Odin that evening. Alone, on the grounds by the lake, the warm June night settling around him, the giant squid making a lazy circuit of the surface. He held the communication stone and said All-Father, which was the word that connected to Odin specifically rather than to Thor or the general Asgardian relay. The stone warned. A connection opened, not visual, just presence, the quality of someone listening on the other end. The stone is safe, Harry said. Voldemort is dispersed. The fragment is quiet. He paused. Loki told me about the anchors. About what you knew. About the fragment. A pause on the other end. I understand why you waited, Harry said. I'm not angry. He meant it, and it came through clearly, not performance of understanding but actual understanding, the kind you arrive at when you've thought carefully about someone else's position. I want to talk to you about Stonehenge. And the rune seers. And what the old man said about my mother. The stone warned, which Harry had learned over years was the Odin method of indicating attentiveness. I think there's something about where my mother came from, Harry said. About the Evans line and the old bloodlines and the connection between the traditions. The rune seer knew something and didn't say it directly. And you know what he didn't say. A longer pause. Then Odin's voice, through the stone, resonant and familiar, yes. I know. Then I want to know, Harry said. This summer, Odin said. Come home. We will talk properly. I will, Harry said. I'm also going to Stonehenge. A pause. Yes, Odin said, and the word carried weight that Harry didn't have the full context for yet but filed carefully for later. Yes, you should. I'll be home in 3 weeks, Harry said. Tell Frigga I'm fine. Tell Thor tell him I did it well. A brief sound that might, from anyone else, have been almost a laugh. From Odin it was simply warmth, which was rarer and therefore more significant. He will be glad to hear it, Odin said. The connection closed. Harry held the stone for a moment, still warm, and looked at the lake in the summer evening, and thought about 3 weeks and then summer and Stonehenge and questions about his mother and the long work of finding 7 anchors scattered through the world, and about a dispersed spirit rebuilding itself somewhere and knowing for the first time in 11 years that something existed that it genuinely needed to be afraid of. Not afraid of Harry Potter. Not afraid of the boy who lived, whoever that was supposed to be. Afraid of the god of magic. Harry put the stone in his pocket and walked back to the castle, the warm evening settling around him, the lights of 100 windows burning gold above him, the old stones keeping their centuries of secrets, and thought that all of it, the complication and the weight and the work still to come, was, on balance, deeply interesting. He was looking forward to what came next.